The girl stood before the rulers of the empire, the king and queen, announced that she was going to marry, which reassured the man. He asked if she was going to hide anything from him. The man spoke of accepting any choice of the duchess. The young men who were potential suitors for the princess supported his words. For Duke Leopold's seat was empty, and the best solution would be to get married this year. The mother of the grooms offered to make the final choice, for there were many handsome and eligible princes before her, but the girl dumbfounded everyone with her words. She wasn't going to marry any of the guys offered to her. Her father got angry, thinking that the girl was bullying him, but Princess Leopold reminded her that her parents had given her the right to choose a groom. The bride said that while she was in the castle, she decided that none of the guys presented would be her future husband. One of the princes yelled at her because he didn't understand what was going on. Those present began to assume that the crown prince would be the new duke, but he was already married. The girl took a step to the side, slowly talking about the man who would become her husband. Princess Leopold stood in front of the blue-haired boy whom she had announced as her fiancé. He raised his head, surprised at such news, looked at her and smiled. Deep in the night, a glass fell in the girl's bedroom. The bride herself was on her knees. When the maid entered the chambers, she was all trembling with fear, with tears in her eyes. But when the king fell in love with the protagonist, Liella immediately began to pursue her. In the end, Liella even tried to The girl trusted this assistant as her own sister, but in justification, she only received words that His Majesty could kill all her relatives if she did not dare to take such a step. The bride did not believe that everything was arranged by the emperor again, because in her previous life, because of him, she had to marry Prince number 2, with whom she gave birth to a child, but she was killed shortly after giving birth. In her second life, Princess Leopold married a family knight to avoid following His Majesty's instructions, but this time too, she was killed by assassins hired by the ruler. This time her third life began. She wandered around the castle, suddenly found a way to cut all ties and decided to do it, but once again she was defeated. The maid knelt before the poisoned mistress, but the princess did not want to listen to her. She was disgusted by the fact that she whined and pitied her, even though she had previously killed her with her own hands. Her eyes began to blur. The girl realized she was dying. She was disappointed that she had been killed by someone she trusted, and even in her third life she couldn't escape from His Majesty's hand. The prince still hasn't come into the room, and Ella wonders where the man is now. It seems he's not willingly getting married, and it's such a shame to leave his bride all alone on the first. It was snowing outside when a crowd of people stood in the middle of a field not far from the castle. Princess Leopold was among them. Her new fourth life started from the same place. Behind her, people whispered, for she had not shed a single tear. This was the fourth attendance at her father's funeral. The girl restrained herself as best she could. Going back in time is already a luxury, but given that the bride did not realize this fact, kept hoping that she could go back to a time when her father was alive and she could ask him not to save the crown prince. 3 months later, Duke Leopold received an imperial warrant that ordered him to stop the conquest. The crown prince, having no experience, decided to take the leadership and started sacrificing subordinates. Eventually, the duke became one of the victims. It was a dignified death, but to think that it was all to save the crown prince's life was unfortunate. Princess Leopold only wished that her father was alive. The girl sighed and considered herself silly out loud. After all, it hurts to let go of someone you love dearly, and no matter how many times it happens, the pain will still never let go. Heinz approached the princess from the back. She was full of hope that the man could comfort her, but he was not sure about it, but tried to convey that the master should go to heaven. The girl should not be so sad. The bride went up to him and hugged him. People were gathering at the monastery for the duke's funeral. Though a storm was raging outside, the weather created an atmospheric silence for the duration of the ceremony, but the girl was able to capitalize on the unexpected snowfall. On the doorstep of the princess met the imperial representative. He was very fortunately late, because the girl was very angry with him, and if there had not been snowy roads, because of which he was delayed, the sword would have been at his throat. The ceremony began. The duke's daughter continued to reflect on the fact that she had already disobeyed her father twice, for he had constantly reminded her that one should be loyal to the imperial family and not go against the Lord. The bride thought about what she should do this time, but decided that she would not listen to her father's words again this time. Her heart was full of hate. Standing by the coffin, the princess spoke her last words to the dead duke. She asked for only one thing: another meeting, a hug, and praise for being able to return after living a happy life. Heinz pointed out that it was quite cold outside and they should go inside, but the girl didn't want to. She only replied that she had a feeling the snowfall would stop soon. That day was the last day of the funeral, but the man offered to extend the ceremony for another month, so that all the guests who wanted to come but couldn't due to weather conditions could bid farewell to the Duke. Having noticed the familiar dog again, Mrs. L approaches it to stroke its soft-looking fur. But after she puts her hand near it, the dog growls at her. Heinz urged that the matter be settled as soon as possible, as preparations might soon be completed. The bride only asked to wait only 10 minutes, which dumbfounded the man. He agreed and left for the monastery. Princess Leopold was standing in the snowfall, wondering if she should stay with her father, when the voices of a girl and a man were heard behind her. They talked about being a little late for the ceremony, and they should have left a little earlier, but most likely nothing would have changed, and the carriage couldn't have arrived any earlier. The bride noticed them and thought about them arriving on time, but she wasn't happy to see them at all. The couple approached Adele and became concerned about her condition. The girl only replied that she was happy to see them home. This couple were the princess's uncle and aunt, pathetic wounds from the past. Gellern Ernst, her mother's cousin, and the one who destroyed the Ernst family. He was a gambling addict. Even though there was a chance that the man would lose all his assets in the casino, the girl's mother did not give up on him. She helped her brother when he needed it. Gellern began using the name Duke Leopold to continue gambling. After his sister stopped helping him, he revealed his true identity. The man constantly yelled at the woman, accusing her of greed and selfishness, since she considered it a waste of money to help the family. In his opinion, his sister had a lot of unnecessary resources. After a while, the father of the family kicked Gellern out. The man himself had not so long ago called the princess's parents heartless, but now defiantly returned to the house with a smile on his face. In the morning, Elle slowly opens her eyes and sees a blonde-haired man with a bare torso in the place where the dog was lying at night. The man approached the grave to bid farewell to his relative, but Adele asked him to remove the flowers. Gellern was taken aback at such a request, but the princess assured him not to do so. The bride said all regrets were for naught, which infuriated the uncle. He was full of confidence that his niece was looking down on him and his family. The princess calmly replied that her father disliked uncles very much, and her only wish now was to put him to rest in peace. But Gellern was not reassured by this. The man approached the girl and started yelling at her, accusing her of being too rough on her elders, who had gotten to the place during a heavy snowfall, and her father's upbringing was not the best. Adele continued to remain calm, and asked whose influence caused Gellern to threaten his own family. After all, her grandparents were quite wise, and everything seemed too confusing. Ella asks the maid to tell her the truth, and not to panic, and tells her that she really wants to meet the chamberlain. Larry agrees to pass on her words, and then leaves the mistress. Gellern offered to forget about everything that happened in the past, because at that time he was too young. But now the man had changed, accepted all his mistakes, and repented of all his sins, and was sure that now the family would be able to live in a normal relationship. Adele found it incompetent that her uncle was so stupid at such an age, and in all likelihood he was oblivious to his behaviour towards her a few minutes ago. The girl was hurt by his words about them being blood family after everything that had happened. In her opinion, all the family gave the princess was grief. The man continued to make a friendly appearance and offered to spend time together. After all, she was due to have a fiancé soon, and her uncle wanted to make sure everything was okay. Family boarders drove the girl into a desperate situation. She tearfully asked for help from her own uncle, considering herself a fool since she decided to rely on this man. Gellern said that everything that had happened in the past was no longer important. Since they were older now, they would gladly help their niece, which pleased the young lady. She only thought that this time she would use the man to the maximum. At night, Adele sat at the dressing table in her chambers. She was surprised that she looked so young, but remembered that her past life had lasted about 3 years, the longest life of a girl. The princess wondered how many more chances were left, or if this attempt would be her last. She was afraid that it would indeed be her last chance, and worried that she might die in vain. It made her angry. The lady was angry because her third attempt was just blown. In her opinion, she should have been a little bit smarter, more cold-blooded, stronger. She wasn't as scared going through the path for the fourth time. Adele only wanted to live, and despite the fact that in the end, all she could get was universal shame, it was worth it to keep moving in that direction. The girl was full of confidence in her success. There was a knock at the door. It was Heinz, who was surprised at the lady's decision to assign a room to Mr. Gellen. At the same time, a man was sitting in the chambers with his wife. He judged his niece for only allotting him some outhouse, thinking that since the grave offering had been rejected, the brother-in-law was saying something about their family behind their backs, or she was as stingy as the girl's mother had been. Adele was like a beautiful flower that had grown in confinement, but in spite of all her sternness, her uncle doubted she could bear it all, assuring her that the blood relative would soon despair and begin to grieve. The princess replied to the aide with a smile on her face that there was no need to worry, for the girl was not going to tremble in front of them. She was only asking them to trust her. The lady reminded about the preparations for the funeral, where many important guests would arrive. The servant thought about someone special should arrive, but no one was expected, except one, a real disaster. But this time, the plan was ready. The princess warned that she only wanted to clean up a bit. Preparations for the funeral ceremony began early in the morning. Aunt and uncle finally began to show their true personalities, truly believing they could be masters of the house. The woman noticed Adele and approached her to ask permission to meet the guests while the ceremony was going on. The girl thought about the fact that if she didn't want to own the house, she wouldn't have said such words. The princess didn't react in any way to the offer. The woman began to justify that she only wanted to help, to get over her father's death more easily. The mistress only thought of the couple wanting to show themselves in the best light. It's disgusting that they are trying to use a person's death for their own selfish purposes. But still, the relatives got approval, which they were immensely happy about. Adele walked down the corridor thinking that it would be exactly the same as it was in her first life. She sat down at her desk, thinking that the second Prince of Grain would be arriving at their place in about a week. That feeling of his sword piercing her heart and stare with mockery still sitting deep inside. The princess rested her elbows on the table and covered her face with her palms. There was a knock at the door. A maid entered the study. Rin, who had killed her in her third life. She was too saddened by the Duke's death. But the girl didn't care about her emotions, for she knew what she really was. The maid's attempts to save her family, the fear she felt because of the Lord, could be understood. But even so, Adele couldn't help her and felt betrayed. The lady politely inquired about her vacation. The assistant presented her with a gift that her loved ones had made. They wanted it to be given personally in her hands. Rin was sorry for the Duke's death, but Adele couldn't forget the horrible memories. Now, when she saw the maid's face, she remembered herself in a pool of blood. The lady thanked her assistant for her words of encouragement and asked her to leave because she wanted to rest, but stopped her by asking how she would react if the princess continued her father's work as Countess Leopold. The maid rejoiced at this news, replying that it would be wonderful, wished her a pleasant vacation and walked out. Adele thought she was a liar. At the Imperial Palace, Zernos was in complete indignation at having to go to Count Leopold's funeral because he hadn't saved his life. The man who sat across from him explained that he would need to attend the ceremony as the prince's representative because the crown prince's wounds had not yet healed and could be bad for his health. He reminded her that he was sending him there specifically because Lady Leopold wasn't in the best of health right now due to the loss of her father, and she definitely needed someone to open his heart to her. Zernos thought that he should prove himself to be at his best. The young man had the task of becoming Count Leopold. Then, the vast estate and untold riches could be his. The prince's eyes lit up. He immediately jumped up and assured the man that he would do everything to the best of his ability and could win the princess's heart. He was sent off to prepare for tomorrow's journey. The boy walked down the hallway, thinking that he could have gotten some boring task, unlike his older brother. Because who if he couldn't become a duke? Footsteps were heard behind. Zernos shouted towards the unknown man and ordered him to show himself. A young man came out of the bushes, Van, the prince's younger brother. The boy pushed his brother and shouted at him to shut up. He didn't like the younger one being a stutterer. Van fell to the ground when the older one said he was in a good mood today, so that's all he'd do for him now. If the younger one continued to annoy the prince, next time, it definitely wouldn't end just like that. As soon as Zernos left, the boy got up, cleaned himself up, and got upset that Jack was going to swear at him again. In the evening, pitiful pleas were heard in the house, men carrying suitcases to the exit, Rin kneeling before her mistress, constantly apologizing and crying. Adele tried to calm the maid, assuring her that it was just a wish. She hadn't made any terrible mistakes. She had a letter of recommendation, so it would be easy to find a job. In the princess's last life, Rin and her family would most likely be killed, and it would be the easiest way for the emperor to end everything. So the surest solution would be to kick the maid out. Lady Leopold asked Sarah to hire a new maid to replace the one who had left. The assistant asked if the lady had a candidate for the position. The woman would be happy to train anything. The girl replied that she didn't have anyone in particular in mind, but hiring Orpha would be a good solution. And on top of that, she asked her aunt and uncle to tell them to meet her and have lunch together. After these words, the princess turned and left, and Sarah warned the lady that she should be careful of her uncle because of his past attitude toward the count and his madam. Adele smiled and replied that she had no intention of getting close to Mr. Gellin. She only wanted to ask a favour. The maid only needed to call them in for dinner. The princess sat in the hall, thinking that the emperor was too hopeful about her marriage, although the girl did not want to dance to his tune. But a frank refusal was not the best idea. To become an aristocrat, one must receive a vote from every member of the noble assembly, a rule created to remove incompetent individuals from the position of head of the family. There were a few flaws in these rules. Most cast votes to their successor, but Adele was an exception because her family is a clan that raised knights, commanders-in-chief, generation after generation. But she was born a woman. One wondered if Lady Leopold would be able to lead an army if war broke out, since she wasn't even a knight, and it would be easier for her husband to just give up the position of duke. Someone expressed their point of view, and many supported it. Even the princess was beginning to think so, but just because she was a girl didn't mean she wasn't worthy. After all, she did love her family. Adele went out on the terrace and looked into the distance. She kept thinking about the fact that the person who will be running the northern region is not her husband, but herself. The princess returned to the manor where her uncle and aunt were already waiting for her. Gellin extended a hand to his niece and offered to join them, but the girl walked past. She thought the man was acting strange, but he was getting angry about her action. When they sat down at the table to have lunch together, then Gellin began to talk about the preparations for the ceremony. The man asked how long he and his wife would still be living in the annex, but Adele suspended their outrage and asked them not to push her anymore, or they would have to be evicted. The uncle began to get angry. The niece only offered to start the meal before the food got cold. Gellin began to calm Sage down, saying about how the princess wouldn't kick them out of the house. He noted that the girl was just as abrupt as her mother. Lady Leopold dined and thought about the fact that their pretense would not work on her, but in a past life she had fallen for this ruse. She asked her uncle aloud if he could do her a favour. Gellin happily promised to do anything for his niece. The girl asked the man to find her a groom because she wouldn't be able to cope on her own, and it would be nice to have a groom to lead the family. Uncle was taken aback by the idea. He could not find the words to reply, so he reminded the lady that he and his wife were helping Adele enough to make her successful in all her difficulties. Sage smiled and happily announced that they would find the girl the best groom possible. After asking if she had a candidate in mind, Gellin sat in complete shock. Adele bowed her head and admitted that she had always thought that her father would find her someone suitable. She looked up and with a smile asked if her uncle could fulfill her request. Gellin agreed, but decided he would discuss things with Sage first. Suddenly a bag of money was placed in front of them, much to the couple's surprise. The niece announced that if Gellin could find a suitable partner for her, the girl would reward her uncle generously. It was a temporary solution if problems arose. The princess took a glass of wine, drank a little, and warned that they should find as many candidates as possible, for she would choose carefully and leisurely. Adele decided for herself that she would make these guys tear each other apart, and asked her uncle to have them send out word that the princess was looking for a groom. All that was left to do was wait. It was a sunny, snowy day outside as Heinz picked up a package from a man at the estate gate. It contained several books. As soon as they said goodbye, the butler looked towards the house. Her uncle and aunt sat in their chambers discussing her niece's statement. Gellin was still embarrassed, and Sage saw it only as a benefit. For in her opinion, girls at that age were constantly changing their minds, and there was little guarantee that she would help her relatives for long. The man thought it could very well happen, especially considering her mother's actions, and it would be quite some time before she would say, "Repent for the mistakes you've made." She's not one to turn her back on Gellin, the mean woman who blindsided the entire family. Considering their blood relatives, everything could be just like it was with his sister. Sage reminded her husband that they had given her hope for 10,000 coins. Coming here during the storm and taking pity on the poor child, the woman thought they were very lucky they had come. The woman urged her lover to be generous and help her favourite niece, for it was all they could do as her elders. Adele was sitting in her chambers reading the new issue of the newspaper and noticed the advertisement that Lady Leopold was looking for a groom from her uncle. She noted that this was the first time an aristocrat had put an advertisement in the paper, looking for a groom. There was a knock on the door and a warning that Mr. Gellin had arrived. The girl asked that he be sent to her. She thought about the fact that her uncle might be inundated with bribes and requests, even considering that he had asked for her help. The man entered Lady Leopold's room and inquired about the headline in the paper, noting that it was not all for nothing, and the crowds of bachelors swarmed to the announcement like flies. In his opinion, everything was going smoothly. Adele smiled and praised Gellin, saying that she had never even thought of such a method. Her uncle laughed in response and said that he knew for sure that such a method would please the bride, and he would soon provide all suitable candidates, so there was no need to worry. Lady Leopold rejoiced and was excited, but at the same time it was naive the young lady had sold herself to get married. But she didn't forget about the Emperor, who would be happy and nervous at the same time. Once the man left, Adele sat slumped, expecting to meet new guests soon. 4 days later, the second Prince of Grain appeared on the doorstep of the estate. He expressed his condolences to Lady Leopold and bowed. The girl thanked in return and expressed surprise that His Highness had personally arrived. The lad replied that it was important to the Imperial family because Duke Leopold had sacrificed himself to save the young man's brother, so he was obliged to be present in person on such a day. Grain was sad to hear of the Duke's death. His Majesty greatly appreciates his loyalty. Adele noted that the prince hides well behind his mask and never once flinched. The girl clenched a piece of her dress in her fist to avoid saying anything unnecessary, and the guy kept talking about the princess's dead father and offered to help get through this stage by filling the void in the lady's heart. Adele smiled and thanked for all the words Zernos had said. The young man took the princess's hand to kiss it. At the same time nearby, Gellin was watching everything and became furious at what he saw. He certainly thought a member of the Imperial family was an excellent choice, but not for their entire family, and Gellin Ant chose to stand before His Highness, the second Imperial Prince. The young men were approached by the princess's uncle and thanked for attending the funeral ceremony. Zernos remembered that Gellin had introduced himself with the last name Ant. The prince recounted an episode in the family's history when they had to sell all their titles because of a son who lost all his money gambling, suspecting his uncle of being the son. Adele was pleased with their meeting, for in order for her uncle to get his hands on all the family's wealth, he needs someone obedient and foolish to be the princess's husband, and the presence of a second prince who fits that role was quite unpleasant. The lady asked Gellin to take care of His Majesty. The man readily agreed, and Zernos was surprised that the princess was not alone in organising the ceremony, to which he received the answer that she was not quite in condition now, both physically and mentally. She was understandable, after all, she had lost her father. She had to do the whole funeral ceremony alone, so now her uncle was doing it. Zernos was surprised at what he said, and Adele, with a smile on her face, asked His Highness to stay at their estate longer if possible. It was only a cheap trick. In her chambers, Lady Leopold stood propped up on her dressing table, a maid standing beside her urging her to be as careful as possible. The girl exhaled. She thought she was pathetic for being scared of Grain. The princess remembered the Emperor's first plan with her marriage, and if she could beat him without any problems, the girl could become the head of the family. If only the plan could be changed. But then the thought occurred to her that the right thing to do would be to devise her own plan, and the more ambitious Gellin became, the more concerned the second prince would be. All they had to do was enjoy each other. In the evening, the lady went out in the street. During the walk, His Highness came up to her and gave her a bouquet of flowers, with the words that it perfectly matched the colour of the girl's hair. But roses could never achieve such beauty of her beautiful hair. Adele immediately realised that he was lying by giving all those compliments, because earlier Zernos had said they were soaked in blood while he held his head and cut them off. But she didn't give any sign and thanked the guy. All she should have done was play along with him, and as soon as the prince thought he had managed to win the princess's heart, but before she could finish her thought, His Majesty suggested she take a walk. Just at the time of the proposal, his uncle appeared. This infuriated the young man. Gellin offered to walk to a cosy room where he could warm up, for it was quite chilly outside. The man beckoned to his niece to discuss the wedding proposals. She bade Grania farewell, thanked him for the bouquet, and departed, handing the flowers to the maid with orders to pluck the petals from them and prepare a bath for her. In the chambers, while the maid was helping her mistress with the gathering, Gellin stood behind them and spoke of several candidates arriving today, at Adele's own request. The princess had one unresolved question, and some time left. She remembered that her longest life had been when she married Zernos, but it was unclear what the emperor wanted. If his goal was to have an heir, why exactly the second prince was involved? The maid warned that more guests had arrived than expected and asked Adele for help, to which the lady agreed because one assistant and the girl's aunt would not be enough for everyone. The girl, along with her maid and uncle, went out to the waiting grooms, who now and then showered the princess with compliments and attention. But even in these tawdry advances, she was able to find a plus. All attention will go to who will be the future husband, and no one even thinks that Adele herself may become the head of the family. But many will definitely be skeptical of such a decision, because of which the conversation between her and the noble assembly will not be very pleasant. But that wasn't such a big problem. The princess had a couple of powerful tricks in store, but the problem was that they were against her father's will. Already at night, the girl began to ponder the fact that these moves would be necessary to become the head of the family. But there was the question of when it would be more proper to use them. A maid entered the chambers. She noticed that lately the lady had been unable to sleep, so she brought a candle that would help with this ailment, said goodnight, and went out. Adele put aside the sheets she had been reading earlier and lay down on the bed. Then she heard footsteps, and her body didn't move at all and didn't want to obey. She decided that it couldn't be the Emperor's shenanigans, because there was no point in killing the princess now, so the devious scheme was thought up by someone else. The girl tried with all her might to make her body move, but she couldn't. She was touched by someone's hand, after which that person was hit in the face, after which the other hand reached under the pillow for the sword. The princess put her sword to the stranger's throat, but as soon as she saw his face, she realized that the unknown man was one of the candidates Adele had met today. The man asked to lower his weapon, but the lady replied that she could kill him. Since she could get away with it now, the prince continued to apologize, making excuses that he had the wrong room. The girl did not believe his words and ordered him to tell the truth, or else she would die. Out of fear, the prince shouted that Mr. Gellin had set it all up. The bride's uncle told the young man that if he spent the night with his niece, he could marry her. These words surprised Adele, and she briefly stabbed the guy with her sword and got out of bed. At that time, a maid entered the chambers to check how the lady was feeling. The princess asked about the candle, who had prepared and delivered it, to which she received the answer that Mr. Gellin had prepared it, because he was worried about his niece's well-being. Lady Leopold was angry and ordered her assistant to bring her uncle and aunt to her. Mistress walked down the hallway with her assistants to meet her relatives and reminded herself that her key method was to use this couple. They invited a bunch of people to the estate, whose minds are clouded by Duke Leopold's title, closed the second prince's chapter, and made Adele look like an aristocrat who lost her grip. But this time, they went over the top. Sage was surprised that her niece had called them at such a late hour. The girl said that a man had snuck into her room to intimidate her. Gellin got up from the table and was horrified at what was said. He tried to ask about his well-being. Adele reassured him that she was able to grab the man and hold him. his uncle laughed. He thought the girl was just lucky, but she interrupted him with the phrase that she had learned from this man, that the incident was Gellen's doing. The man shouted that that prince was a liar, and he would never do such a thing to his favourite niece. Sage rose to her husband's defence, advising the princess not to take this rogue's word for it, because it could have been a setup to sow confusion between the relatives. Adele was surprised, for she had asked the other guests before meeting them, and they told the same thing her uncle and aunt had told them. The princess decided to have some tea, and thought that if they spent the night with her, they would be the next duke. Gellen became nervous and shouted that the lady had misunderstood everything. Every word was a lie. He thought he was just being hasty, but every action he took was so that his favourite niece could find the right man. He thought she would be able to believe him. Besides, they were one family, and for her sake they had to try and understand each other. Adele remembered that he had done the same thing to her mother. Even after all these years, he was still garbage. It was time to take that very garbage out. The princess asked not to worry. After all, she understood everything perfectly, and they were family. The girl only planned to be attentive to the incident, which pleased Gellen. The uncle calmed down and said he was sure his niece wouldn't do anything wrong, and he should have been more careful, but they put the suitcases in front of him. Sage was surprised at this act of the princess, and Lady Leopold herself announced with a smile on her face that she was throwing her uncle and aunt out of her house. But after a little while, she said that she was mistaken, and then ordered them to get out of these lands. Gellen tried to remind Adele that everything they were doing was for her good, and she was definitely overreacting by kicking them out. But the girl knew that the couple had extorted money from the guests who came by ad, and that they were the ones who had sent the aroma candle that had the paralyzing poison in it. The relatives decided that their niece would not take any medication that night and victory would be theirs, but they were too stupid. The princess pointed to the suitcases in front of them, told them to get out, for it would be the only way to save their miserable pelts, and they should have been happy with a simple kick-out, as the good way was to be punished, which the girl chose not to do. Gellen realised that Adele did resemble her mother. They even looked similar, and began to remind her again to help, rebuking the fact that in the girl's opinion, they were of the same level. Lady Leopold felt that Viscount Gellen was not worth having around because she was acting head of the family, and her uncle was the one who had sold out his own family. And in her eyes, he was only her mother's rejected brother. Her uncle was tired of listening to her ruminations and humiliations. He only thought she was ridiculous and naive, since he thinks any of the princes would want to marry her. In his opinion, she would still end up alone at the end with her flaws. He was trying to bring the best of the best for her, and she so easily dared him to kick him out. Gellen looked completely insane as he stepped closer to his niece, screaming that he was going to beat the arrogance out of her. Before he could finish speaking, he fell to the floor due to a blow from his back. Behind him stood Lord Eldor Shanks, who had returned after hearing of the Duke's death. On a snowy day, the Lord and the Princess were strolling through a field together. When he asked her to leave him alone, Adele turned around and headed for the manor. She looked at him from a distance and remembered that in a past life, a man who didn't know where to put his grief cried alone. At night they met again, at the grave of the girl's father. In the princess's second life, when she married Eldon, she had to escape from the nightmares that started because of the cereal. The girl lived in constant terror, but Eldor was able to accept her as Lady Leopold. The Lord looked at her and thought she wanted to talk to him about something. She only thanked the man but didn't have time to explain for what exactly. Her father came to see Eldor. He again asked to be left alone. Adele had tried to avoid crossing paths with the Lord as much as possible during her third life, and planned to do the same this time. But he needed someone to comfort him. The young man sat kneeling in front of Duke Leopold's grave, behind him trying not to get in the way. His daughter stood and smiled. Eldor turned around and noticed her. The Lord had always respected the Duke. He was the one who genuinely wept at his grave. She couldn't help him in any way but completely understood. Eldor was confused and wanted to explain everything, but the princess only apologized, and there was no way she could leave him alone. After all, she knew how much he was hurting right now. The young man needn't have bothered, and he could have cried in front of her, but he was uncomfortable with the way she looked at him, because of her loyalty to the code of chivalry. It sounded unexpected since he is so uncompromising, That's why she chose him in her second life. Adele went over to him and hugged him, saying that she likes to watch when he cries. If the man wanted to cry, there was nothing wrong with it, and blindly suppressing the emotion would only make it worse. The princess once again thanked the Lord for all he had done, thinking her father would have done the same, and offered to spill their grief together. Eldor looked at the girl with tears in his eyes and hugged her back. After all, he apologized for his meager knowledge of etiquette, but she only urged him to get on his way sooner, for the sun was almost up. The pair stood opposite each other, but unexpectedly for Adele, the Lord drew his sword and sat on his knee in front of her. This had never happened before. This was his way of showing his respect. Lord Shanks began to speak. He wanted to be the princess's protector and put his life on the line for her and asked for a chance to protect her. Despite his life, she asked for his forgiveness because she didn't want to get him involved again, and she had to say no. The next day, Lady Leopold discussed the events of the night before with the second prince. He was extremely shocked, and the girl was already expecting Grania to leave her soon. Of course, the guy wasn't going back to the royal palace because there was absolutely nothing to do there, especially since the emperor didn't trust him. Zernos didn't trust either. He rather liked the possibility that the crown prince might die in the near future. He hates the emperor very much, and Adele was the one who faced his hatred. The prince said not to worry about it. His Majesty was calling him, so he had to leave tomorrow for the capital, and Lady Leopold was to go with him. The emperor was calling her too. Technically, the emperor had invited Lady Leopold to the royal palace, considering that the girl was not so simple. Most likely Zernos had asked for His Majesty's help. This trip was a good opportunity to understand his true intentions. The only problem was getting rid of Zernos, though the bigger problem was getting married. Heinz came up to her with a large stack of papers to deal with before she left. The man inquired who would be travelling with the lady besides the second prince. The girl thought it would be better to bring Lord Eldor along as well, given the situation in the region. The butler decided to give him the message himself and begin preparations, so he left the lady alone with the papers. She could not concentrate on the case. Only Lord Eldor was in her mind. The knight's oath confirmed his loyalty to his master, and to the knight it meant forever. If she accepted his offer, he would protect her even more than he had in his previous life. He had already died once because of her, and that was enough. The girl only needed his strength and power. Would Adele be able to make the right choice? The crew travelled to the capital in the afternoon as it snowed. In a couple days they would arrive on Martin's property. After a night at the residence, the remainder of the trip would be by train. Zernos asked if the girl had travelled first class on the train or not, and wanted to tell a story about her first trip. But Adele interrupted him and asked him not to tell her everything anymore. The prince was surprised because he explained everything for her sake, and now she says that she no longer wants to hear such things, and the princess in turn smiled at the young man and said that to explain, on the contrary, it is worth it to her. Probably the guy has forgotten what kind of family the girl grew up in. Zernos thought it was the right thing to do. Adele was glad he had finally stopped talking. She realized she would rather correspond with him than hear that awful voice. The lady began to tell an old story about a depot in Martin's territory. She says that long ago, the protector of Leopold's territories, the Red Dragon, reduced the possible amount of mana in the region to stop the dark mages. Thank him for the peace in and around Leopold. But there was a catch. The amount of mana in the region made it difficult to use magic, making it impossible to create mana trains. Then, the first Duke Leopold decided that the depot should be built next to the territory of Leopold, on the territory of Martin, so that the land of Leopold, truly fertile, with this phrase, Zernos interrupted the girl's story. Adele was not happy about this, realizing he needed some context to flatter the lady. He was apparently sure he was doing the princess a favour with this story. The prince remarked that by looking around, anyone could realize that this land was magnificent, and the lady remembered his words that the lad hated the long winter and this place. He asked if the residence was loyal to the girl, and remembered the fact that the region had developed rapidly in the past. Zernos wanted to add something but didn't have time. The carriage started to shake. There was a monster next to them. Adele opened the door, and the man started yelling at her not to do that. While they were being attacked, the girl only replied that they needed to make a plan, and for it was worth finding out how many monsters there were. The boy shouted back that it wasn't her job, it was the job of the knights, but the girl didn't want to listen to him, deciding that it was her job because she was Lady Leopold. The princess got out of the carriage and noticed that the ground was shaking. It means the monsters are very near. Lord Eldor came to her and warned her that they are fast and huge. But she didn't listen to him either. She only asked to take the prince out of the carriage, otherwise if she is turned over he might die inside it. There were only 5 monsters. His name was Fluff. He only lives in the northern region. He's bloodthirsty and only appears in groups, so it's very hard to fight them. On top of that, Fluff has poor eyesight, but his hearing is excellent, and none of the knights except Eldor have ever encountered him. Adele called out to the Lord, but noticed the knights pulling out their rifles. This was not to be done under any circumstances, because they could only attract the monster's attention with them. One of them shouted for the others to get the prince out of here while they delayed them, even though the rushing Fluff was weakened. Still, even one could be a huge hindrance. The knight once again asked to evacuate the lady and the prince. After that, he shot one of the monsters. The princess was not going to leave. She remembered one trick that could be used to kill from, but everyone was panicking and couldn't think straight. If this continued, there was a risk of dying. The girl clenched her hand into a fist, ran over to the sword lying on the ground, picked it up, and made the right decision for herself in such a situation, to try to kill them. Eldor was surprised by this act of the lady, and she continued to strike the monsters one by one. When all the monsters were defeated by the lady, she stood covered in Cannon's blood. Not far away from her in complete bewilderment were the knights that saw it all. Adele rebuked the men for standing like stooges while they were attacked and ordered them to pick up their swords. As a child, when the princess was still young and the girl's father was alive, she began to learn how to wield a sword, and despite the fact that she began training later than the other children, Adele was very talented. Lord Elwyn praised the girl and said that she should keep improving her skills. Then she could become a knight in the future, but such a prospect did not please her father. The man asked not to tell anyone about it because no one was supposed to know that Adele could wield a sword. The girl was surprised and asked why that should be so. The father took his daughter's hand and told her that except for him and Lord Elwyn, no one had ever killed anyone, and if she killed anyone, she could never touch a sword again in her life. The girl stood in the middle of a snowy field. Lord Eldor approached her and apologized for what had happened, promising to find a new and better carriage to replace the destroyed one. Adele reassured the boy and thought that the prince would want to travel the rest of the way alone to rest, so it would be hard to get a new carriage in their situation. The Lord apologized once more for what had happened, deeming himself too incompetent. The princess said it was not his fault, and afterwards jokingly asked if the carriage had been destroyed because of him. Eldor stood completely dejected. He must have felt very bad about the incident. It was all because of the kind of person he was. The girl once again told herself that she would not marry him in this life. For in the past it was all an empty promise. To Lord Adele was only one to be protected at all costs. He believed that whatever he did showed his loyalty to Count Leopold. And even with that in mind, it was unclear how. But Eldor's attitude towards the princess was a little different. The pair were riding in a carriage when the man asked the princess a question: why she was hiding her sword skills. Lord didn't know it, but in the girl's second life he asked the same thing, to which he received the answer that Adele wasn't hiding the skill, but just didn't have a convenient occasion to demonstrate it. The girl promised her father that under his protection, she would never pick up a sword. She confessed to the boy that the battle with Fluff was a bit difficult, due to the fact that she hadn't picked up a sword in a long time, and thanked him for the just right words. Eldor asked if Adele wanted to become a knight. It was the same question he had asked her in her past life, and got the same answer, no, but the princess had changed. The average age at which one enrolls in the Royal Academy is 10 years old. The lady was no longer a suitable candidate, and how would she then fulfill her duties as the temporary head of the Leopold family? The man did not understand why His Excellency had not sent the lady to the academy. She knew, but answered Eldor that if her father were alive, she would have asked him such a question. The Lord apologized for his stupid words, but that wasn't what the girl meant. She just couldn't tell him that she didn't go to the academy because of the Emperor's interference. It wasn't clear what her father was thinking then. Adele admitted that it had been so long since she had held a sword in her hands that she was a little tired. Eldor suggested she get some sleep, and he himself would stay outside for her safety. But this place was perfect for napping. After all, it was a new carriage. The attempt to change the relationship between them was not going the way the princess intended, so she decided to go ahead and ask the Lord to lend her a shoulder, which dumbfounded the knight. After all this, Adele was tired, and being here a guy did not embarrass her in any way, and she once again asked him to lend her shoulder as a pillow, but he did not say a direct no. The girl realized that it was complicated with him as usual. The princess shared that it was the best idea she could think of, but if the knight was uncomfortable, he could refuse it. The guy said it was fine. The lady smiled back at him. They sat down next to each other. Adele asked again, to which Eldor agreed again, and the girl could see that he was definitely uncomfortable, but he still didn't refuse her. His hair was hard and stiff, but if the princess asked to lie on his lap, there was a chance he wouldn't be able to stand it. But he couldn't refuse, for it was Lady Leopold's orders, and this time he would most likely accept her offer. Adele told the Lord the story of the knight that married the lady he was supposed to protect. He protected her during the wedding, but only as a knight, not as her fiancé. She had questions for him. Would the knight who married his master be unhappy, or would he feel used and resentful of the lady who took away his freedom and happiness? The princess's attempts to stifle her guilt looked cowardly, and the Lord replied that he didn't think so. The knight probably just wanted to protect her, wanted to seem nice, but all he knew how to do was protect her. Adele fell silent. Eldor was a little startled by this, and she explained that this was the answer the girl wanted to hear, so that was the end of the story. The Lord was completely irreparable. Finally, the second prince and lady arrived at Martin's residence, the host sharing that he had been diligently preparing for the couple's arrival as soon as he heard the news of their visit. Eating and looking at Cyriel's face was difficult for Adele. They were met at the residence by an old friend of the girl's father, Count Bake Martin, who had overcome the snowfall to attend Count Leopold's funeral, and the princess was grateful to him for it. The man noted the improvement in the lady's condition since their last meeting. The heroine thanked him for his concern, and regretted that the crew had encountered monsters along the way. Fluff, who lost his food due to snowfall, has moved away from his main habitat and is gradually approaching the lands near the residence with each passing day. When Earl Martin first heard about the incident, he was so shocked that he couldn't stand on his feet. After the man heard about the second prince's victory over the monster, he was even more shocked. Adele didn't really like this news, for she knew how things really were, and the Count continued to question Grenier about how he had managed to defeat Fluffy. The girls silently watched the prince's reaction, because he, absorbed in attention, gave everything out of his dumb head, except the information about Lady Adele rushing into battle alone, and the information about how strong Fluff was. So he took all the laurels for himself, though he himself would have been frightened by the mere smell of the monster. The princess was grateful to the guy for digging his own grave. Zernos replied to the man that he did not think of it as a great feat, and asked Lady Leopold what her opinion on the matter was, to which he received only a smile. Adele approached Earl Martin, finding him humble because of his treatment of his expeditionaries, where everyone is a veteran or recognizable soldier, and everyone knows it. The man thanked the princess for such words, and shared the real truth that there was a good harvest last year, so the number of monsters increased, and the Count can't hire someone, and they don't have many people. The girl was upset by this news, thinking that Bake could have asked for help from the Leopold house, but apparently he didn't do so out of respect, since they already had a lot on their plate. Count Martin was surprised at the trick His Majesty was using, and wished that his men could learn it too, but Zernos replied that he was already tired. He explained that he was heading to the capital with the lady as per His Majesty's orders, so they would need to leave. After they ate, Adele said they would need to get permission from the Emperor. The girl spoke with a smile on her face about being allowed to join the expedition. She figured that since His Majesty was known for his patience and wisdom, he would allow her to stay when he knew all the circumstances. Zernos was clearly unhappy with his companion's suggestion, and she went on happily, praising the prince for his victory over Fluff and thinking he would add morale to the team. The princess asked why he was refusing to participate in the expedition. The young man got up from the table and repeated that he was very tired, so he planned to leave immediately after the meal, then looked at her menacingly. Adele agreed with her companion's words, thanked Count Martin for the fine meal. Then they departed, the man left standing alone. As soon as the couple was alone, the prince grabbed the lady's hand and looked at her angrily. The girl was completely bewildered, asking why he did it. The guy said something through his teeth, and then turned to Adele. He said that if she wasn't Leopold, and if her family's territories belonged to him, there was no way he would give her the right to look in his direction like that. Zernos warned that in the story of Fluff, to boost the royal army's morale, they would say that he had killed him, only because those who protected them decided it was for the best. Adele held onto her sore arm and didn't understand why the guy was angry, though she was in agreement with the others. She told them that once she became Leopold, she learned a lot about enslaving evil creatures. She was able to defeat Cannon even with poor skills through hard training, and did so for the benefit of His Highness, but not because of warm feelings for him. The princess finished speaking, and the pair stood in silence for a few minutes, after which the girl decided to talk about the monster's weak spot, the middle of the forehead, because their tough skin is weaker in that place. Zernos laughed at her and her tactics. Afterward, he began to assure her that the weakness of all monsters was sight, so it was easier to just punch them in the eyes. But Adele disagreed. The girl did not agree with her interlocutor because hitting Cannon in the eyes was a senseless idea, because he already has problems with his eyesight, and it is much easier to attack in the forehead. The prince thought over his words and agreed with the lady's idea, and she in turn replied that her trick was beyond the lad's ability. But if Adele covertly trained His Majesty, he could manage. Zernos thought about it. For the sake of the lady, he was obliged to join the expedition and decided that he could get permission from His Majesty. Besides, it would be quite dangerous there, so he would need to protect Adele. The princess asked the prince why she should take part in the expedition, for she would be cheering them on in the castle. This greatly surprised the young man. At night, the girl sat in the manor with Eldor. He treated her bruises. It was a surprise visit from him, and an official summons from His Majesty. Then everything fell into place. The royal family wanted to arrange a wedding between Lady Leopold and the second prince, and if the princess is happy, it's okay. That's what everyone thought. But if someone hurts her, Adele tried to reassure the lord that everything was fine, but he resented the way Zernos was treating her. She didn't care. The phrase upset the knight. The girl had a cold look, as if she were an alien. Now she looked like a completely different person in Eldor's eyes. After the Duke's death, she had begun to carry the burden of the head of the House of Leopold, and it had changed her. If he could not protect her, he wanted to at least help her. The lord asked if she was going to marry the second prince, to which he received the answer that this trash will never become Lady Leopold's husband. She sees him only as fuel. The man was surprised. After all, he was supposed to be the fuel, and asked why Adele had given him all her credit, and even helps with the expedition. The girl realized the knight had noticed as well. His Highness was already thinking about the second prince becoming her fiancé, regardless of her opinion. It was the Emperor's wish, and there was nothing anyone could do about it until they had a valid excuse. The lady was going to ruin all of the Emperor's plans. That was why she needed the expedition, for Earl Martin needed to side with the aristocrats or the royal family, and if anything inconvenient to Granius happened, he would have to cover it up. The girl clenched her dress in her fists and thought that it wouldn't be enough to cancel the wedding. Even if everything went according to plan, the slightest deviation could cost them a big mistake. Eldor decided that such a move could be very risky. It would be easier if Adele agreed to marry him, because if she already had a fiancé, then His Highness would have no choice. Besides, he thought it was safer that way. He made a promise that if it was important to the lady herself or the House of Leopold, no one could harm her, so she could settle down and join the Royal Academy to ease the burden of being the head of the family. Adele looked a little disappointed. She had never had such a hard time being the head of the family. The only thing that was hard for her was making sure that no one would die this time. The girl reassured the knight, thanked him for his concern, and refused again. In her head, she mouthed that this was the way to do it, so as not to lose the chance she had gotten, and not to make a hasty choice and decide who would be her husband. There was a knock on the door. One of the assistants delivered a message from Earl Charles Butler. He sent a box as a gift and a message to make sure the gift was delivered. Adele opened it and was surprised. In the royal castle, the emperor was sitting in his office. He was in a good mood because seeing his son find his place was truly a joy. Felix enters. a neat-looking man, a ghost of course, with glasses and a dashingly twisted grey moustache. He asks Ruslan that he must have brought the money, since he had called Felix. Looking man, a ghost of course, with glasses. Even considering that Adele was the Queen's daughter, she was nothing like her at all. His Majesty thought that all that could be expected of his son was simple-mindedness and immaturity. There had never been a thought that he could be so helpful. Nothing was in the Emperor's way now, so it was time to allow Grain to participate in the expedition. The second prince was a little frightened, for he had asked the princess twice to go with him, and had not given up hope that she would agree. Count Martin was glad of their participation in the expedition. Lady Leopold cheered up the squad by saying that the task was not that difficult, so the expeditioners had nothing to worry about. In this campaign, Lord Eldor was responsible for making sure no one got hurt under Grain's command. Adele said she would expect them to win and would pray for success. The knights mounted their horses and set off at dawn. The terrain was thickly forested, so the second prince couldn't see where they were. The young man turned to one of the knights to clarify how long it would take them to get there, and if they were on the right path. The man replied that they would need about another day or so to arrive at Cannon's intended habitat. Zernos was not happy with the answer. He assumed that the expeditioners had done a poor job of research since the habitat was presumed. But the animal did not stand still and changed location frequently, so their exact location could not be determined. The prince suggested stopping to rest since it was a long way to go, but the others disagreed with him because it was too early to stop for a break. The boy said he had come here to defeat Cannon. It was a waste of his time and energy, he thought. Eldor apologized for the oversight, and the squad continued onward. The next day, the expeditioners noted that they had not found any monsters, and the second prince remained dissatisfied because the place where they intended to stay was bad, as was the food, the bad weather, and cold adding to the inconvenience. He decided that if anything happened to him during the hike, it would be bad, so he needed to get everything sorted out and back as quickly as possible. The knight warned that the traps that the evil creature hunters had set should start soon, because the Count thought it was a great opportunity, and he asked Grainier's opinion on the matter. The prince looked at his interlocutor with horror in his eyes, and replied that it was a bold decision on his part to say such things, and in his mind he was mocking the words of a knight in the royal court, and apparently he wanted the lad to follow the words of the small hunters. One of the travellers spoke of Lady Leopold's absence with them, but the other man didn't understand why the girl was brought into the conversation. He was urged to be careful not to embarrass the royal knights in front of the expedition team and the hunters. Zernos reminded them that he had joined the ranks for their own good, so all they had to do was trust him and not be afraid. One of the knights approached him and asked him to be quiet, as Fluff was very sensitive to sound. The prince didn't stop that. He decided it would be best if he came to them himself, as immediately footsteps were heard coming from the forest. The lad warned the others to aim for the middle of their foreheads. The young man gave a couple more tips, but the squad stood in a stupor and didn't move. Zernos started yelling at them to all get ready for battle, but one of the team members said that each of them knew the monster's weak spot, but none of them had enough skill to attack. The man continued to speak and recalled the story of His Highness killing 5 monsters. His words scared the prince a little, for it was not him and no one else who could join the fight. The young man yelled at the squad to stop messing with him and again ordered them to prepare to attack, at which time Fluff was already approaching the travellers. One of the knights pushed Grenier aside, sat him down on the ground and asked him to calm down, but the prince broke free of his grip, got up from the snow and ran towards the monsters. He tripped on a tree branch that was sticking out of the ground and fell to his knees. One of the creatures was already behind him. The prince started to ask for help out of fear. Suddenly, Adele appeared in front of him with a sword in her hands and struck Cannon with it. Once the monster fell dead, she turned to His Highness. Fear could be seen on his face. Lord Eldor saw the princess and approached her. The girl immediately asked about the casualties, but fortunately no one was hurt. The lady began to learn about the progress of the expedition and how long ago the monster appeared. They were lucky that Fluff hadn't shown up that long ago, so Adele expected to be done with this as soon as possible, and encouraged the others to do so that they could return to the manor as soon as the battle was over. The expeditioners returned late at night, and were met by Count Martin and condemned them for not remaining in camp another day, and thus exposing themselves to danger. One of the knights carried cereal on his shoulders. The man noticed this and asked for a doctor, but he was warned that the injuries were minor, and now the prince was asleep. The master of the residence ordered to inform His Majesty and quickly make a detailed report to send as soon as possible. Everyone calmed down, but the count was confused by the foul odour that came from the young man. The man decided that it was also worth informing the emperor about it. Bake thought the prince was strange, not only because of his lies, but also the silly mistakes it was dishonourable and embarrassing of him. He wondered where Lady Leopold was. The butler reassured the man, saying that she had arrived at the residence before anyone else and was already resting in her chambers, and given the worries and turmoil His Majesty had brought, she wanted to be alone. Adele walked into the bedroom, leaned on the door and began to laugh at the spectacle that Grania had put on. She thought he was worthless and useless. To a girl, he was just plain worthless. The past, filled with fear and pain, restrained the lady, made her shiver in anxiety for her life, even if there was a thought that this life will be different. The ghosts of the past didn't want to leave just like that. It was all right now. This simpleton didn't scare the princess anymore. A little later, the count met with Adele to talk and have tea. The girl told him that the gift she received she liked. This very gift was a sword. She was very surprised by such a thing. The princess wondered how Martin had guessed that he was the one who had killed Cannon, and he replied that he had just guessed and was glad he had hit right in the bullseye. The sword had been dispatched out of curiosity. Once Beck heard a story about a teacher who had to keep the talent of one of his students a secret. He remembered the face of a father who disappointed his daughter. Adele thought the man might know why the father wanted to hide his daughter's skills, but he knew nothing. All he heard was a quiet grunt. The girl was a little disappointed. In all likelihood, the real reason she would be destined to never know. The count noted that her father's description of the princess was very different from reality, and while they were at dinner, the man became more and more convinced of it. The lady was too composed and calm for an aristocrat who was ready to marry anyone in the kingdom. Now Martin thought that all the hype was one of a stunt, but the girl admitted that she still hoped to meet her fiancé. The man thought that the announcement was a distraction. Adele admitted that the thought was correct, because His Highness was hoping for a wedding between the princess and Grania, and that outcome would not be a pleasant one for the girl. A friend of her father confirmed the lady's assumption and joked that wet pants were not very suitable for the role of a groom for her. The interlocutors laughed. The man was proud of himself that the joke turned out well. The count asked if the lady was going to become the next head of the Leopold family. Adele confirmed that her words were not some idle chatter. Martin replied that a man is defined by his actions. He believed that the girl was competent and strong enough to put the words into practice. The princess considered the interlocutor shrewd. He in turn admitted that it was only a small trick, which sooner or later the lady would be able to master. Beck asked about the wedding. The lady shared that she was still thinking about what to do with it. The count asked how she felt about marrying the man's son, although the young man is not that talented and without global achievements. But he is very kind and faithful, so he could be a perfect match. Adele was surprised at such a suggestion and replied that she would think about it. The potential groom's father was flattered by this response. The girl smiled back. Count Martin suggested that by now all the knights were probably bathing in alcohol. They must be glad that the difficult expedition had ended without casualties. He thanked the princess for such emotions. The girl thanked the man in return for the wonderful conversation. He warned that she could keep the sword because it was a gift. The princess smiled gratefully. Adele didn't think her anxiety had decreased, but her heart was filled with warmth. It seemed that the distance between father and daughter had slightly decreased. She wasn't going to give up and wanted to wait for spring. The girl wanted to wait for the snow to melt at the end of winter. This was the 4th time she had waited for this time. The strange air that went along with it was close to the princess, and today, as always, she kept repeating to herself the same thing, that she would wait for the warmth at the end. The second prince had exceeded Lord Eldor's expectations. No one had thought that Zernos would leave Adele alone and return alone. It was hard to digest how pathetic the young man had turned out to be. The princess was surprised to see the knight angry. This was something you didn't see often. It was something new. You could see how he had lost control of his emotions. The fact that he managed to make the worst possible decision when no one was pushing him to do so. You had to be thankful for that kind of thing. The journey became much more comfortable. Count Martin approached the lady with the news that His Highness would be leaving early. He was worried that on such a long journey to the capital, the girl would go alone. Adele thanked for the concern, but she trusted her knights to protect her. She only wanted to ask a favor to keep the performance secret during the expedition. Just then, the man took a break from writing the report. But there was one problem. Everyone had seen the princess's skills, so it would be quite difficult to conceal that fact. The lady believed that everything would be perfectly fine, and for the sake of preserving the prestige of the second prince, they would not talk about it, which meant that Zernos would become an unknown, useless soldier, and all the laurels would go to the warriors of Duke Leopold and Count Matan. The man decided that he should now detail all the efforts made by the second prince, Adele thought to herself. If a ruined reputation is a disgrace to the royal family, it becomes a disgrace to the entire kingdom as well. Spoiling the expedition, running away and pants wet with fear. After all this, Zernos will not be able to bear the humiliation that fell on him from all sides. On top of that, he asked for the princess and ran away to the palace. These facts cast doubt on the thought that he would be a suitable candidate for marriage. The girl wondered who the emperor would propose this time. Because of the remaining princes, the only one who was suitable in age was the third prince Yang. Besides him, not counting the youngest seventh prince, there were still 3 others. The possibility of a change of candidate was high. The whole situation seemed rather amusing. In the king's castle, His Majesty struck Grania and began to reprimand him for such a failure on the expedition, for he had volunteered, but had not gotten the outcome he had hoped for, and had fled alone humiliated. The man continued to strike the prince with accusations of ruining the plan. The young man sat on his knees and to himself blamed Adele already for manipulating him. Before this, His Majesty had never hit him. The boy thought his older brother had done nothing outstanding. He had merely returned from an expedition in which almost everyone had died. The campaign that Grania was on at least did not fail. He reached his hand out to the emperor, hoping to justify that he had fought with honor. But he had made a small mistake, for his father did not know that Lady Leopold had killed the monsters. His Majesty asked the butler to take the second prince out of the study and call for Ian. The young man was in complete shock and was afraid of what would happen to him next. Adele was sitting in her chambers when one of the maids alerted her to the visit of a stranger who was looking to meet her. The girl was surprised as she wasn't expecting anyone. Entering another room where her guest was waiting, she saw a dark-haired girl, Irina, whom they hadn't seen for a long time. Her arrival was a big surprise for the princess. The girl inquired about the lady's condition and admitted that although she had sent a letter to her friend, she was still worried about her and was glad they could meet. Considering Irina worked in the palace, her family's status was rather modest. It must have been difficult for her to travel to the northern lands during the heavy snowfall. Adele thanked the girl for her concern. Behind her friends stood 2 assistants. They made the lady a little nervous, for she did not know why they had come, whether to meet the princess or to keep watch. The heroine offered Irina to take a walk together. They went out into the garden, where Adele asked the girl how soon she was going to return. It turned out that things were already packed, but the news of the arrival of the princess made her stay a little longer. The friend was surprised that the lady had come so early, for she was to be here tomorrow, and the one whom the lady wanted to meet today had not arrived. Lady Leopold confessed that she had fought with Fluff. These words shocked Irina. Adele realized that the rumors had not spread yet, and the emperor would stop them by all means. The friends continued to talk on the subject when they heard shouting behind them. The princess turned around and noticed Grania nearby, yelling at some guy and hitting him. He was very angry with him. The unknown man was sitting on his knees in front of the second prince and apologizing with tears in his eyes. Adele peeked from behind the bushes at what was going on. She was surprised that the guy who was getting hit didn't respond to him in any way. When the victim raised his head, she saw his golden eyes. In this child, the girl recognized the emperor's son. She didn't understand why he was being bullied like this. At this time, Irina took her hand and suggested that they leave as soon as possible so they wouldn't be noticed. The lady asked who this guy was, that even her friend couldn't say something. He turned out to be Prince Wang, a shadow of the palace. The emperor perceived him as a mistake made one night. Adele was greatly surprised. In him she recognized the fourth prince named Vincent Ferdes Athanas. From her memory he had died at the age of 16. This was the first time the princess had seen him in all 4 of her lives. Irina began to push her friend towards the castle so that they would leave unnoticed. But the second prince continued to shout at his brother. In his words, the princess heard accusations in her direction. The lady paused to hear if he was really talking about her when Lord Eldor appeared behind them. When the heroine saw him, she asked one favor. She became interested in the fourth prince. So she asked the knight to follow the guy and find out everything about him without attracting attention. The man nodded his head and left. Irina asked, when the last time the lord had rested and noted how everyone fell for it, when Adele decided to take a walk with her alone. The princess laughed and replied that she had given Eldor a rest, but he wouldn't use it, so she gave him a task. On a starry, beautiful night, the lady took a bath and thought about the fact that thanks to Count Martin, she was able to reach the capital earlier than planned. These circumstances allowed her to see many interesting things. Irina is working as an assistant in the palace. Right now she's taking some time off because of her work in the northern part of the kingdom. Soon, she'll start travelling between the north and the capital again, which is a good thing. With her influence, Adele could leave her in the capital. Then she would be able to help and stay in touch with all the happenings of the city. The princess was glad to meet a close friend. The fact that the lady was calculating and had weighed all the pros and cons, but much was lost in trying to survive and stay afloat. The girl finished with her water procedures, climbed out of the tub, and covered herself with a towel. The thought swirled in her mind that today's dinner might have been cancelled, and soon the emperor would call her to get what he had wanted for so long. He would begin preparations for the next stage. If Adele would begin to fulfill all his requests if he was the one to control her. But more stunning were Grain's words the day the lady gave birth to the baby. The second prince took the infant in his arms and was overjoyed at the birth of his child, for he hoped by means of it to obtain recognition from his majesty. The lad's eyes were full of madness. The lady didn't understand why he killed her in her second and third lives, if his goal was to find a successor to the royal family. The girl dressed and sat on a chair at the entrance to the balcony, where Eldor was waiting for her. The lord explained that he didn't want to be seen, and it was the only way. The princess invited him in, whereupon the man began to talk about the fourth prince's residence. Van lived in a very shabby place, and the knight saw the stable boy helping him heal his wounds. Adele thought that, contrary to rumours, he was not a fool at all. He was sitting in the stables where the servant wanted to help him, but he refused because he was sure he would be beaten again tomorrow. The princess's unbearable day had started with lunch next to the emperor. He decided he should have called the lady later. He felt like the girl hadn't fully recovered from her long journey yet. The heroine thanked the man for taking the time to dine with her. Amidst all the royal commotion, His Majesty replied that he was worried about her because of all the problems she was facing. The emperor admitted that he was much relieved to see Adele in full health. The girl thanked him again for his concern. The man began to talk about the blizzard in the lands of Leopold. He thought that because of the cold climate of the lady's home, she would find the weather in the capital strange. But she objected and called it more refreshing than strange, and noted the stunning-looking garden. His Majesty shared that the garden gets warmer and warmer every year, which is why it's always so green, and urged his guest to relax and unwind as much as possible the entire time she was at the castle. The girl thanked the emperor again, and wondered how long he would suck up to her before he reached his goal. The pair were silent for a bit, and the emperor spoke of Duke Leopold's death. He considered the event truly unfortunate, died nobly, and yet the kingdom in that instant lost one of its pillars. His Majesty failed to help, and would now reproach himself for his incompetence. Her Majesty was also grieving, and the man asked her not to hold a grudge against them. He said that the royal family would never forget Duke Leopold. The girl began to go over his words in her head. Adele didn't know if it was right to say the word noble about her father's death. Even though he knew he wasn't ready for it, the crown prince still stepped in and made her father lead the army. And while the prince was hysterical, someone supported him. This was not Duke Leopold, but the emperor, the one with the highest position in the entire kingdom. He let things go, and if he was truly sorry, he wouldn't hide the truth behind all those sweet speeches. The person who came to the funeral should be truly sorry. Such a person should have been the emperor. He should have come and paid his respects by at least placing one lily on the grave of the princess's father. Tears appeared in the girl's eyes. They made His Majesty worried. The lady reassured him that she was just touched by such nice words. The emperor asked her to stop grieving. After all, the fact that she was in the royal castle was already a significant help. In his opinion, even someone who is grieving needs help and peace to calm down. Adele replied that the man's words comforted her. He in turn confirmed that comforting words are always matchless. After these words, he suggested the lady to speed up the wedding process. The princess was surprised at his words, and the emperor admitted that he would like her to marry one of the princes and become a member of the royal family. This was exactly what Adele had expected. Apparently, he wanted the girl to become a member of the royal family. After all, the man began to talk about the Leopold lands being independent and unsociable without the head of the family. He believed they were at risk. His Majesty considered the most suitable candidate for the role of Lady Leopold's groom royalty. The heroine in turn admitted that when the second prince visited her family's estate at the will of the emperor, she already guessed what it was all for. Adele was insanely happy. She confirmed the man's words that she needed someone she could really rely on. His Majesty was glad that the girl could understand his intentions. The princess was reminded of her family's essence of bravery, with not fearing the enemy and taking pride in her swordsmanship when she saw Zernos leading the expedition as the sword of the whole nation. He had a huge responsibility, so the lady began to worry about how he would manage the family. The second prince's father tried to justify himself by thinking that the girl had always lived locked up and was shocked. The emperor reminded that monsters were very dangerous and no one could be calm in front of them. Sword skills didn't matter at times like this, and mistakes in the first battle were common. Adele was surprised by such confessions. The man asked not to reject the man because of his shortcomings. After all, the expedition eventually ended in success. The girl decided that she had offended His Highness because of her short-sightedness and promised to apologize to him. The lady remembered that the emperor had mentioned several princes and asked that she be trusted to choose one of them. The man agreed and warned the lady to think hard. The girl hoped that she would be given enough time to think about it and decided that she would choose a suitable groom during her stay in the castle. After lunch, the princess returned to her chambers and pondered over that meeting. She was slightly surprised by the atmosphere, and she had in no way expected to receive a written oath from the emperor. When the crown prince ascends the throne, his brothers, the other princes, will have to leave the castle and the capital. Apparently, the wedding was the deciding factor in their leaving the palace. Right now, in the entire kingdom, there was no more suitable candidate for this than the Leopold family. At the same time, there was a knock on the door. The aides alerted that she had received bouquets from the princes. Adele had the maids put the flowers on the window so they could be seen from the other side, and she herself realized that these gifts were a clear sign that right now, the princes were hard at work making her their wife. In one of the bouquets, the girl found a note from the third Prince Jan, and thought that if she were choosing a groom out of all the princes, she wouldn't even look at him. The princess asked if there was a place to ride a horse in the castle, and asked the maid to tell her knight about it so he could take her there himself. Adele smiled and waited to meet candidate number 1. The sun was shining brightly outside as Eldor rode the horses with the princess to where Prince Van lived. The pair dismounted from their horses, the knight questioning if she was sure she wanted this meeting. The lady replied that now she had to choose one of the princes. They said that pearls grow even in mud. The man sighed, then asked if she was going to keep information from him once again. The girl laughed and told Eldor that she was very interested in watching them make idiots of themselves. With the Lord's help, she learned that Prince Wang was not stupid at all. That day when Adele saw Grainya's bullying, then the knight stayed in the garden to follow him. He said that after the second prince left, he fell down after a while and looked very helpless. It was unexpected. He quickly got up and began to reason out loud why his brother was taking his anger out on his younger brother, if he was the one who had wet his pants and been dumped by the woman. A stable boy ran up to Van and advised him to be careful with his words. The guy didn't understand how he had found him. The man explained that he had gone after the second prince. He looked disgusting and had come here by chance. Eldor was surprised that the stable boy knew he was just playing, and at the same time the younger prince sighed and said he was very tired and wanted to get out of the castle when the emperor died and the crown prince took the throne. Van changed the subject and asked if there had been any recent encounters with horses. The stable boy ran after him. Eldor asked Adele if she thought the idea was too risky. In his opinion, the prince did not watch his words and actions. In addition, he is very exuberant. The lord considered him a real teenager. The princess asked him not to worry because she is not so easy to offend. The knight looked at her warningly. The lady had already headed alone towards his house. It was wooden and completely unsuitable for the young man's status. Adele looked inside, and she was lucky that Van was there at the time. The girl called out to the guy, which startled her. The lady asked for help. She said she twisted her ankle. The prince didn't understand how he could help the princess. She asked him for a place to rest, to find a new horse because hers had run away, and the last request she asked was for him to help her walk. The guy stood puzzled, took the heroine under his arms and led her into the shadows. She furtively looked at him. They accidentally met a glance, after which Adele realized that the prince was a bad actor. The girl decided that she would need to spend a little more time with him. They walked, Prince Wang thought. Why on earth would he, a royal prince, have to help a nobody move? He couldn't believe that the lady above him needed help from the younger one specifically. The young man figured she only wanted to use him. The resentment was evident on his face. Adele looked up into his face and wondered how he hadn't been caught yet. They reached the haystacks, which Van suggested the lady sit down on to rest. The princess looked at the stable. It stood in a secluded corner of the castle. It was small and not interesting to anyone, although it was shabby but very strong, and the atmosphere was much cozier than expected. Van was standing next to a white horse. The lady thought it suited him well. It was probably because they had the same caretaker, stablesman Jack, who was assigned to the fourth prince. Adele decided that this very white horse would suit her. The guy warned her that it was quite ugly. The girl asked the young man's name. He preferred to keep it a secret. The lady continued questioning. The next question she asked how long he had been working at this place. Van couldn't remember. The lady got a little frustrated and thought to ask what the prince might know. Adele saw fit to ask if he wished to be free. At this phrase, the guy turned around. The lady went on to say that it would be quite nice if the emperor died soon. Van sighed and began to judge the princess for saying such words. To him she seemed rude. He asked her to leave, after which he approached one of the horses and offered to ride it. The princess asked to stop acting out, for she knew that the emperor had 11 sons, and so far, the only one who had survived was the 7th prince. Even if one has the strength, the royal palace, this is where someone alone will become a candle flame in the wind. If the prince can survive here without anyone's help, then he must have turned into a fool who has no chance of ascending to the throne. At the end of her thoughts, Adele called the guy by his full name. Prince Wang didn't know how to react to that at all. He tried to object that that wasn't his name at all. The princess sighed unhappily and once again asked for the play to stop. In her opinion, he was a terrible actor, and his real position in the castle was clear to absolutely everyone. The lady repeated verbatim everything he said about escaping from the palace and regarding the 2nd prince. The 4th prince was extremely surprised. Adele admitted that she was the one who dumped Grania, then introduced herself. Van couldn't find the words to properly express all his emotions, so as soon as the princess finished speaking, they stood in complete silence. After a couple minutes, the prince asked what the girl's motives were. He thought that the lady intended to play him, due to finding his weakness. But the lady admitted that she didn't consider His Highness to be his friend, and intended to make a deal with the guy, and if they both tried their best, Wang could be free. Adele thought that because of her proposal, both of them could get their benefits, namely they needed to have a wedding. These words dumbfounded the young man even more. The princess looked to the side and noticed that Jack was coming back. Van was at a complete loss as to how on earth she knew about the stable boy, and walked over to the white horse to saddle it, with the words that she had come here just to introduce herself and needed to go. The prince started yelling at her, warning her that this horse was really complicated, but she didn't listen to him, got on the horse, thanked the guy for meeting her. The lady promised to meet him again, after which she galloped away. Jack ran up to Van and began to ask who had come to see them. The lad answered nothing and stood silent, bowing his head. Already in the castle, the girl walked down the corridor and thought about the 4th prince. because for someone who hates the emperor and the entire royal palace, he was a suitable candidate for the role of a groom. It wasn't even worth mentioning that the lady could control him. She had once again confirmed that the fourth prince was perfect for the role of her fiancé. But just dragging him in was useless. He must willingly hold Adele's hand. On her way to her chambers, she bumped into one of the assistants who greeted her, after which the girls entered the bedroom, which was filled to the top with gifts. The maid warned that the third prince had come unannounced, and hinted that he was apologizing for the unexpected visit, and had brought all these gifts. He wanted to meet in person, but was anxious and impatient because he had very little time. Considering his troubled heart, he apologized. The girl asked where the third prince was at this time, and entered the next room where Prince Yang was waiting for her. He greeted the lady and introduced himself as Vincent Yan Athanas. He kissed the princess's hand and smiled at her. Adele thought that both in the present and in the past, they knew next to nothing about each other. Lady Leopold was surprised but delighted to meet her, for she too wished to propose a meeting and thanked the prince for the visit. He replied in the same way. The pair sat down on armchairs, and Ian confessed that when he saw the flowers in the third royal garden, he wanted to show them to Adele, and while he was walking around, he drifted off in thought, suddenly realizing that he had already come to see the lady and apologized for his ignorance. The girl looked at him and realized that this prince was much better than expected. The princess, out of curiosity, asked if the young man liked flowers. He explained that his mother had indeed loved them, and following her, he had fallen in love with them too. The lady remembered hearing about Her Highness the Fifth Queen's beautiful garden. The prince's nickname was Gardener Yang. His mother, as a princess from abroad, greatly loved the affection of the emperor and grew up to be a beautiful woman of great intelligence and mild character. To society, she was a fine lady. But Zernos wasn't so bad for society either, after all. He grew up in a great environment. So Adele was full of hope that the rumours about Ian were lying, although sometimes gossip can be true. The third prince asked if the girl had been to the capital before this visit. She replied that she had been here when she was a little girl, but she couldn't remember much anymore. Jan suggested that we look together at the sights of the capital and visit the central square to look at the night sky, because this place was his favourite and he often went there. Adele was surprised. How can he be there often if it's outside the palace? The guy admitted that he often escapes with his servant. After all, he's in good standing and can do that. The prince was quite strong and unambitious, but also quite competent, so no one could find any flaws in his personality wherever he went. No one noticed the guy, and no one wanted to harm him. Fortunately, Ian has a rather mild temperament, which helped him to easily get out of difficult situations. Adele listened to his monologue with a look of amazement on her face. The princess felt that the young man was quite objective about himself. He thought exactly the same, and believed that this was his strong point. If this variable did not exist, it was likely that the lady would have chosen him. The maid heard echoes of the couple's conversations in the hallway and peeked into their room to check on things and noticed a laughing lady in the company of Prince Ian. The young man admitted that he was extremely curious after hearing that Adele had arrived in the capital, because when he was a child at the royal palace, Duke Leopold had come to the castle periodically, and the lad had glimpsed him a couple of times. His harmonious look, full of dignity, delighted the third prince, but he could not say so, for he was afraid of his stern gaze, and the only time he smiled was when he spoke of his daughter, so he was interested in looking at her and talking to her. The death of the hero is indeed unfortunate. All the people of the kingdom admired him. The girl listened to this with great surprise, and the prince himself smiled while talking about it. It was time to say goodbye. Jan expressed his gratitude for the meeting and hoped that they could see each other again. Adele replied in the same way, and as soon as she had seen her companion off, she asked the maid to bring all the letters that the prince had written. The princess felt she had to answer them, and warned that from tomorrow she would be meeting the princes one by one, so she should have prepared carefully for that. As darkness fell, Van lay on the bed in the stable, trying to sleep, but he could do nothing, for he could not get out of his mind the meeting with Lady Leopold. Not counting Jack, this was the first time he'd had a normal conversation with someone and gotten a kind smile in return. But other than that, the girl was awful in his eyes. Her look and speech seemed intimidating. Even Zernos didn't look so intimidating against her. Jack noticed the boy was stirring without sleep and asked if anything was bothering him. Wang asked if there could be such a woman who would want to marry him. The stableman said he would be very handsome and attractive in 3 years. The man began to fantasize about how the meetings with the lady who would become his lady of his heart would go. The prince felt uneasy and decided he would try to sleep again. He turned away from his friend and wondered why Adele wanted to marry him, and considered that this girl was not the one for him, and she was definitely up to something. In his study, Zernos learned from the maid that Lady Leopold had met with Jan, which he was extremely unhappy about. Besides, they were quite friendly with each other. The second prince had never liked his brother. He thought that in all likelihood the princess liked just the kind of people, and her standards were a bit low. He thought about the two of them getting married, and remembered that very last meeting with the emperor, when he asked the maid to bring him Jan. The guy got angry and started throwing things around. The thought that he was not an ordinary person, but Grania was His Majesty's most favourite son after the crown prince was spinning in his head. At this time, an assistant entered his room, informing him that Adele had invited him for tea. The pair met in Lady Leopold's chambers. The young man didn't understand why she had invited him, but it wasn't that important. After a couple of minutes, the princess apologized. She apologized for being short-sighted and careless, which had offended His Highness. She had realized it all the last time she dined with the emperor. Even if the lady had practiced sword-wielding, she was not familiar with the terror of battle. Apparently the prince had an inordinate fear, so it was difficult for him to fight. But even under such circumstances, Zernos bravely led the ranks of the army. The girl apologized once more for her foolishness. The prince became nervous and replied that considering his chivalry, he could admit the mistake, and considered that the lady was very much smitten with Fluff. Adele praised the young man and explained that His Majesty had told her to choose one of the princes to be her groom. But the whole truth was that she had been thinking too much about Grania. He was the only one who had come to Leopold's property in such inclement weather. On top of that, he had calmed her down and cheered her up with words and the gift of flowers. Then the princess was still grieving, and despite the weather, her feelings were fixed on the second prince, and it bothered the lady. The guy replied that he had pretty good intuition, and if he hadn't done all that, such things were still felt with the heart. He did everything because he knew how the lady felt, and that's why he agreed to join this horrible expedition, even though he was confused about the lady's attitude. But he managed to put all feelings down. He explained that if Adele felt anything like that, Zernos would sincerely consider everything. And besides, the young man trusted the emperor. His father's admonition should be meant for the two of them. The prince, as his child, cannot go against His Majesty, so he would like to get the good news to him as early as possible, and it would be good for them to choose a wedding day together. The young man said that the bride needed to make an effort. The girl laughed awkwardly. Just then, the couple was disturbed by a maid who announced the arrival of the sixth prince. Adele asked the second prince to end the meeting, for now she had to meet his brother. Even though he was only 12 years old, His Majesty told her to talk to everyone. Of course, the princess agreed with him, because no one can know a person only by the words of others. Once Zernos left the office, he was extremely surprised to see his younger brother out the door. The boy greeted the older man, the boy said hello back, and in turn noted that they hadn't seen each other in quite some time. The third queen was also there. The sixth prince replied with a smile on his face that he would have been happy to talk to his brother, but he had a meeting scheduled with Lady Leopold. Adele left the office to say goodbye to the second prince, hoping that they would meet again. During the night, the man asked some of the boys to return his belongings, which were quite traumatizing, to which the young man replied that all their injuries would be on his conscience. His friend replied that if he didn't want that to happen, he needed to take all his things away from them. The man got nervous, but after a while, the unknown men realized it was time for them to go back. One asked the other if they had an appointment with Lady Leopold, but it was tomorrow. The friends agreed that the girl was rather irritable and threw the things they had previously taken away at the man. The boy wondered if he would freeze to death in the place where the lady lived, since he would also have to fight monsters in such cold. Around the corner, a little farther away, stood Eldor. According to Adele's orders, the only one he was supposed to keep an eye on was that servant who was suffering from the eternal attacks from the young royal family members. Most likely, he was being treated like this because of the fourth prince. In the stable, Prince Van was talking to the foal he called My Lady, and had prepared a custom-made hay blanket for her. Behind him he heard sounds, thinking Jack had returned. He assumed that he should go to bed, got up from his knees and went to the exit. But it was not the stableman at all waiting for him there, but an unknown man dressed in black. He frightened the young man. Slightly pulling back his hood, the guy recognized the unknown as Lady Leopold. Out of surprise, he threw the bucket he held in his hands at the princess. The girl picked up the object and handed it back, saying that she was a little hurt. Van asked what the lady had forgotten at such a late night. She replied that she had come to talk about how he was welcoming guests. In his opinion, it was awful, and the stable was cold, causing Adele to ask for something warm. The prince, in bewilderment, almost shouted that he had not even invited the lady to visit, and even rudeness should have its limits. He asked to be told as soon as possible what the lady wanted and to leave. If Jack saw the princess, he would be very surprised. Adele looked at the guy in surprise. He didn't understand what was happening to her. After all, he had done his best to pour her, and she hadn't even touched. The lady pointed to the mug, which made the prince think she wouldn't drink from the mug because she had grown up spoiled. But she only asked why there was only one mug on the table, figuring there weren't any more in the stable. The young man sighed and said it was late now, muttering to himself that he should be more relaxed about what she was saying. The lady picked up the mug to taste the drink. Van sat down across from Adele and asked why she had come. The girl started talking about treating horses well, but that was no surprise since the guy had grown up with them. He began to explain that horses are his friends, and each has its own character. They help him in a difficult moment. The girl admitted that as a child, her father taught her how to treat them. It was drizzling outside. The couple sat in silence. Then the princess decided to ask why His Highness wanted to run away from the palace. The prince replied that there was no point in him being here. Absolutely everyone wished he wasn't here, so he wanted to leave and not look like an idiot. To feel free for once, Adele decided he had no plans after leaving, and the very reason for running away wasn't that grand. Van started to object, figuring she had never bothered with such a thing. But he was wrong, and looked questioningly at the lady. The lady admitted that he was completely suitable for her, which in a way was unexpected. The prince's golden eyes sparkled from the light of the moon. He was shocked by such words. The girl continued talking. From the outside, His Highness seemed to her a prince without power, looking like a fool. Maybe he was tired of it, but he was perfect for the role of groom. No one but her could provide him with freedom. Adele smiled and added that her type was a strong man to rely on. He was especially like that. Wang reminded that he is still growing, so the heroine hoped that in the future he will be taller. The princess told the terms of the deal. She gives the prince freedom, and he will marry her. The guy was confused. The word freedom beckoned him, so he didn't know how to answer, because the girl was offering him freedom so easily, and in return she would use him. But at the same time, he would do exactly the same. He wondered if he could trust the lady. The young man didn't answer anything, but just sat with his head bowed. Adele expected him to react this way, because he was too cautious, so it wouldn't be that easy. But she would still throw a stone on that calm surface of the water. Lady Leopold rose from the table and called Eldor, saying it was time for them to leave. Van glanced anxiously in the lord's direction, whereupon the knight placed the cloak over the girl and met the prince's gaze. The prince looked up and saw this most reliable and strong guy. The lady warned that the young man could not know when he would need help. Besides, there was no one here with powers that can help him, and it's worth better to think over the offer and make the right choice. The guy didn't answer anything. The knight along with the princess mounted their horse and rode back to the castle. The rain continued to pour. Adele had warned that it was the rainy season, and there were always accidents happening in this weather. She asked Eldor if he was keeping a close eye on the servant Jack, and asked him to continue his surveillance. In turn, the man asked if the lady was really going to marry the fourth prince. The girl replied that this was the essence of her plan, thinking that the lord was against their wedding. The knight, with a sad expression, said that it was all right, and he would follow the lady whatever decision she made. After which, he gripped the bridle tighter. On another rainy day, Adele sat in her study playing chess with Prince Ian. She had won a crushing victory, and despite losing, the young man kept smiling. The guy replied that he enjoyed the game, despite the result, and it was quite amusing to watch the lady. The girl laughed and noted that apparently she had already been read and she didn't even know it. The princess asked the prince to tell her what kind of person she was. He explained that the lady tries to help people openly rather than secretly. This fact was the best arrangement for the groom. Even with all the words and compliments Ian had said to her, she wasn't going to be soft on him. The guy added that in his opinion, a relationship should be casual. Adele thought about that phrase, wondering if her plan could be considered coercion. She was a little upset, though in all likelihood the young man didn't mean what she thought he meant. In his study, the emperor asked the maids which Prince Lady Leopold had met, and was informed that the bride had seen all of them, but most often arranged meetings with the second and third princes. It was reported to him that most of his meetings with Prince Yang were spent in the castle, and when Prince Zernos visited, they usually went out somewhere. The emperor immediately knew that these two were the bride's favourites. Although the third prince looks obedient, but inside he is stubborn and unwavering, his father could not trust him with such an important task. And on the other side of the scale was the second prince. The lad wasn't doing so well, but he was easy to control and quite obedient. His Majesty once again reminded him that an heir must be successfully obtained from Lady Leopold. Looking ahead, Zernos was better suited for the role. The emperor felt he was too lenient on the princess, and he had the right to steal her time. The man asked the maids to send her an invitation. Adele sat with an awkward smile on her face next to Cyril. Across from them was the emperor. This was, of course, expected. But wasn't the man's intentions too obvious? The emperor said he had planned to express his appreciation for his contribution to the expedition today, but delayed doing so a bit because he was busy with matters of state. The lady smiled and asked not to be praised, for the second prince had successfully led the army and defeated Cannon. The whole success of the journey was his merit. She regretted that she had not witnessed the might and bravery of the groom. The emperor confirmed that Zernos had worked up a sweat and was glad that the girl understood the whole point of chivalry. The young man had not said a single word during this entire dialogue. But as soon as the man finished speaking, his son put in a word. He thought it was still chilly in the lady's lands. Adele confirmed this thought, but added that wild flowers were starting to bloom at this time, and despite the cold, she wanted to show them. The princess was surprised, because the emperor thought that the lady invites the prince to his possessions right now. But it was not so. According to the father of the groom, the girl has already, to some extent, has already made a decision. The lady thanked His Majesty for his attention, and replied that she was able to spend a lot of time with the princes and make a choice. Zernos rejoiced when he heard this. Everyone was full of hope that the bride would make the right choice. On a rainy night, Adele walked around the palace and thought about the fact that the emperor was trying to manipulate her. And because of her long stay in the castle, it would be hard to buy some more time. There was still no word from Van. It was frustrating. Because of the rain, nature was changing. Flowers were coming to life. Rivers and lakes were filling with water. But part of that change was increasing accidents. In the princess's past life, during this period, the fourth prince had drowned in the lake. She had heard rumours about it in the north, but ignored them. The girl remembered something about the incident. The mentally unwell fourth prince suddenly attacked the fifth prince in a fit of rage, and when the knights protecting the fifth prince drove the enraged elder away, he drowned in the lake. The fourth prince the bride met didn't look like a fool, and all his antics were pretenses. To attack the fifth prince there had to be some reason. The princess had her own guesses. While the girl was in thought, she was called from behind by Lord Eldor. She turned around and asked what had happened, and how the surveillance was going. She wanted to know about it. The knight looked a little tired. Apparently he was in too much of a hurry to see the lady. He looked like a man who had no one to rely on in difficult situations. She felt like giving Eldor her helping hand. Van looked out from under the roof at the dripping rain. He wondered why Jack was late. Usually, he could be compared to an alarm clock. This alarmed the young man a little. He decided he needed to find him. The prince went out into the rain without an umbrella. It was raining heavily that day too. The boy was walking barefoot in the downpour. Some maids saw him and thought he was strange. After his servant died, he was very ill. Everyone in the palace had heard about it. He was pitiful. Considering that the servant had no support, it would be a big surprise if he could survive alone. Before Wang's mother died, she had told her son the way he could survive. If the prince wanted to survive, He needed to get weird. He laughed as he stood in the rain. A man came up to him and asked if he wanted something to eat. This was his first encounter with Jack. The man led the boy to a warm, dry place and placed a full bowl of soup in front of him. In Van's short life, it was the most delicious food he had ever eaten. The only person who helped the child feel warm was Jack. The prince thought he would have to ask the stablemen again to make potato soup yesterday. At this time he was trimming the bushes, but now he wasn't there. Walking a little further, Van noticed Jack lying on the ground. Blood was visible on his face. The guy crouched down next to him and tried to bring the man to his senses. Wooden objects were scattered and broken around him. The prince realized it was another joke of those twins and touched the stable boy. He was cold. The wound on his head was quite serious. The guy picked up his friend and carried him to the stable. He was having a hard enough time carrying Jack. He put him on the ground again and started looking around to see if he could spot anyone nearby. But no one was around, so he just yelled to call for help. Again there was no one around, and he was all alone, only a powerless Van. Eldor ran up to him and asked him to show him where the stable boy lived, so he could get the doctor. Already at home, Jack was lying in bed. Next to him was the doctor and Adele. The princess asked if he was all right. Because of the fact that the man had been lying in the rain for a long time, his body temperature had dropped. His condition was rather pitiful, but there was nothing to worry about. He had broken his left leg, and the other wounds were only minor scratches. The head injury was not as deep as it seemed. Jack had a pretty strong body, so he should eat well and he would be fine. Adele asked Eldor to escort the doctor out, and she stayed with Van. The prince must have been too shocked. The girl touched the young man's forehead, for he too had been out in the rain for a long time, and a good decision would be to see a doctor. It didn't seem at all important to the guy. He was more worried about how the knight knew that Jack was lying wounded in that place. The girl admitted that the Lord was following them, just to get to know him better as a partner. But it wasn't worth worrying about, because it did help. Van replied that the lady should have blackmailed him into saving the stable boy in exchange for a wedding. Adele thought it would be unfair of the bride. In her opinion, a deal based on blackmail is wrong. The lady thought the prince felt helpless, for he was in an endless and heavy downpour, alone in a vast garden, without strength, without a man to rely on, with a sense of helplessness. The lady concluded that the young man was powerless when he couldn't even protect the one person dear to him. But she had strength. If he marries the strong Adele, he too could get hold of that strength. The girl said goodbye because Van wasn't feeling well either, and should rest. She offered to meet next time and left the house. The prince stood with his hand clenched into a fist. He didn't want to trust the woman. The young man went outside and asked the lady not to leave. He was scared because everyone who has powers is an enemy. The thought was going around in his head. She is just like the others. The day Adele would be displeased, then Wang risked being squashed like a fly. But most of all, it scared him to be powerless. The usual scared prince was unable to do anything or help anyone. He walked up to the girl and said, looking her straight in the eyes, that he agreed to the wedding for her to protect him because he wanted to be strong to protect. The lady smiled at him. The rain was already over when the heroine together with her fiancé were sitting at his house. He was trying to find out what she wanted to get from him. The first thing the girl asked was how it was better to talk to him, businesslike or casual. Wang didn't expect such a question. She explained that even His Majesty doesn't allow himself to speak carelessly to the princess, and asked it because she didn't expect their relationship to become like this. The lady just wanted to set boundaries to see if the young man would be polite to her, or if she should be casual in dealing with him. The guy preferred to be polite. Adele smiled and hoped they could find common ground. Van clenched his palms into fists and admitted that despite the pretense, it had been a long time since the guy had been courteous to someone. The princess thought it was because he had been brought up wrong. After all, Jack was the one handling him, and O would never criticize the prince if she had a chance to teach him. Something good might come out of it. The lady decided to return to the main topic of conversation. She warned the young man that when the emperor approved their wedding, they would have to travel to the lands of Leopold. Van was worried about how the bride would get permission if he was still a child, but there was no need to worry about that. Adele was going to marry him when the groom was a little older. For now, they only had an engagement waiting for them. The guy asked what benefit the girl would get from the engagement, but she would get the most important thing: life, The young man was afraid that because of the enemies of the heroine he might die, but this was also not worth thinking about. Adele assured that the danger could only come when the prince got the promised freedom. Then Van asked who could threaten her life. The bride, with a smile on her face, replied that it shouldn't concern him. In order for the girl to do anything, she needed the guy's help. She warned that after the wedding, the emperor would ask him to keep an eye on the lady. He had to agree with him, but watch his father to report everything to the lady. Wang was scared because he thought Adele wanted to do a coup, but all he had to do was be a double agent. He would do it perfectly. After all, he had been doing it for the past 16 years, despite being forced to do it. He didn't have a purpose before, but now he did. Because there was a man to protect, Lady Leopold had asked for him specifically because she trusted him. Recently, the prince thought about the fact that the girl really knows how to pick up words. She thanked the guy for the compliment. When the conversation ended, the lady left with Eldor. All the way he silently watched her. Here, he decided to point out that she was in a pretty good mood. He was right, though she tried to hide it. In her fourth life, Adele was trying to make the same choices at the same time as in her past lives. Previously, the lady had tried to avoid them, but in the end could not escape death. Now, a new chapter had begun. Despite the intentions of others, the future depended only on Lady Leopold herself. She couldn't wait to see the emperor's face wrinkled with anger. Of course she wouldn't stop being vigilant as long as the bride, along with the fourth prince, returned to the lands of Leopold. A letter arrived at the royal palace especially for Lady Leopold. The emperor opened it and began to read it. It said that in the next few days, many nobles would gather to honour the memory of Duke Leopold. There were many nobles gathered in the bright hall of the castle. Many knew that there would be a memorial ceremony today, but some thought that instead of a ceremony, the girl would choose her groom. That's why there were so many people. Prince Zernos and Ian stood out among the crowd, all making their assumptions as to who she would choose in the end. For with the second prince, the bride had spent a lot of time together lately. But some doubted, because they knew of his performance during Count Martin's expedition. Rumour had it that His Majesty's screams could be heard even in the hall, adding to the third prince's chances. No one could guess on whom the princess would choose, because even the seventh prince could become the chosen one. But everyone was sure that none of them would refuse the best sword of the kingdom, vast northern territories, and untold riches. In addition, they were accompanied by a very beautiful bride. Zernos looked around at the people and noticed the people around them gossiping about Adele's choice. The second prince was full of confidence that he would be the lady of choice today. He looked a little closer and noticed Wang among the nobles, which he was surprised to see, for he was not supposed to be here for any reason, at which moment the arrival of the king and queen was announced. The ceremony began. Adele sat on her knees in front of the emperor. He asked if she was ready to choose one of the princes to be her groom. The lady thanked for the offer and announced that she was ready to marry. His Majesty was reassured when he learned that the girl had made a choice and hoped that the princes would accept any outcome. The grooms confirmed his father's thought. The nobility rejoiced that at last someone would take Duke Leopold's place. The wedding was supposed to be the main event of the year. The Queen asked Adele to voice her choice between Prince Grain and Prince Ian. A girl in the crowd asked Irina who her friend would choose, but even she had no suspicions. The princess began to make her choice. She announced that her fiancé was not the second and third princes. Everyone was surprised. The emperor interjected menacingly. After all, she had agreed to the wedding a few minutes ago. The lady said everything from the bottom of her heart. His Majesty, not understanding what was going on, was getting angrier by the second. The lady reminded that the man had given her the right to choose. The bride took a few steps and approached Van, announcing that he would be the one to be her groom. The guy looked at the girl with a smile. The aristocrats whispered amongst themselves. The emperor pounded the throne menacingly and shouted at Adele, accusing her of daring to joke about him at such a moment. The princess looked into the crowd and met Irina's gaze. The crowd was puzzled. The queen warned that the fourth prince was not well. The bride apologized and explained that in her eyes, Van looked more innocent and kinder than the others. That's why she fell in love with him. The prince shone a bright smile. It was she and the calm, quiet voice that calmed the girl. The lady told of an occasion when she twisted her leg on a horseback ride. Then it was the fourth prince who helped her and picked up a safer horse. The crowd murmured. Some remembered that Wang had been quite intelligent at a young age. Some of the aristocrats thought that this was not the best time to reminisce about the past, but many knew it was true. Adele continued to narrate. The next fact was that when she went to him to thank him for his care, he brought her a mug of warm milk. There was no way the lady could forget his kindness, even if she wanted to badly, thinking it was love. None of the lady's words pleased the emperor. He only hoped it wasn't all serious. But the girl dismissed his thoughts and formally asked permission to marry Prince Vincent Ferdes Atanos. His Majesty reluctantly agreed. The girl bowed and thanked the groom's father for the blessing. In the evening, when the sun was already setting, a butler came to Van with an invitation to dinner from Lady Leopold. Before the meal, Adele arranged for her fiancé to have the best bath possible and sent clothes as a gift. Finally, the couple gathered around the dinner table. The lad felt a little awkward, and Adele decided it was time to come to her senses, and it became definitely known that the prince could stay in the ladies' chambers until the engagement by His Majesty's permission. It was time to talk about something important. The lady warned that soon the emperor was to try and get rid of the groom. In favour of his true plan, she asked the young man to stay with her. Van was frightened, and the girl listed some methods to beware of to stay safe. He remembered all those words the bride had said earlier, and they were fundamentally different from what the lady was saying now. Deep in the night, Prince Yang asked his father if he would really allow the couple to marry, but the man couldn't renege on his promise. The boy reminded him that there are always ways to get rid of his brother. The emperor hesitated, and his son continued, suggesting that they disguise everything as an accident and ask the lady to choose another prince. But the man knew she would be able to guess that it was all planned. Although Adele was acting rather innocent, but she was smart for her age, this fact was obvious, remembering how she asked Wanpun to join when His Majesty approved the wedding. According to the man, she would do anything to protect her fiancé. And besides, the prince is still a prince. There was no benefit in the death of the Duchess's fiancé. It would only have a negative impact on the royal family. Now there was only to wait and see, because he could be even more useful than Zernos. The couple was sitting in the bride's chambers when Wang learned that he was to meet his father. She asked if he had ever seen His Majesty alone, but the young man had never had the opportunity. The prince asked what he should do at the meeting, and Adele thought that the emperor was now trying to figure out if the groom would be useful to him, and how valuable he was. It probably wasn't that easy for the young man right now. The princess calmed down, replying that she would tell the young man what he should do. Eldor stood beside them. He turned his head towards the door, and hearing something suspicious tried to warn his mistress. He didn't have time. The door opened. Behind it stood Zernos. It was clear from his appearance that he wasn't in the best of moods. Everyone in the room turned their attention to him. The second prince said he had been relayed about the princess's occupancy. He was getting closer and closer to the pair, noticing the girl in his foolish brother's training. The lord approached the lad and warned him that the lady had a guest. The enraged young man paid no heed to the knight's words, but only growled in his direction not to disturb him and walked away. At this time, the lady greeted the prince. She decided that the guy had an urgent matter. Since he came just now, he approached the bride almost closely and said that it was necessary to explain his strange preferences at once. The lady did not understand what he was talking about. Definitely, he was talking about that wretched child, as Grain called his brother. Adele had warned him that he was too mean to his blood junior. He asked why on earth the girl acted cute the whole time, as if she had chosen him. The princess explained that she had met all the candidates without prejudice and never said she was sure of her decision, and His Majesty had already approved the wedding, and apparently the second prince was going to go against his father's wishes. They were getting really angry. Zernos was looking at the Duchess with his arrogant look, which she didn't like so much, and he didn't understand how the girl dared to look at him with such eyes. Wang was a little scared. He hoped that big brother had already calmed down, but his facial expression continued to be mad. He asked why on earth he was being treated like an idiot. The second prince raised his hand to hit Wang. As soon as he swung to strike, then Adele appeared in front of him. A bright red mark was left on the girl's face. The lady clutched her bruise. At this time, Zernos wanted to try to justify himself, but the lady interrupted him, saying that she did not wish to see the lad until Leopold returned to the lands. The prince was perplexed. Van stood behind the girl in confusion. The lady asked the assistant to escort His Highness out. At this time, the groom's eyes filled with tears. When the guy left, then Adele asked Eldor to show the fourth prince his room. The lord saw the young man off. He looked at his fiancée, who was being helped to ease the pain of a slap. She noticed his gaze for the last time today. You could tell from the groom's eyes that he was worried, but it couldn't be helped because he continued to act like a fool even when people were looking at him. But still, if Zernos had hit the fourth prince, he wouldn't have gotten away with a simple swollen cheek. Van was sitting in his bedroom. His hands were shaking. He was thinking over the situation that had happened. After all, he couldn't even ask how the bride was feeling, and she was hit in his house. The guy felt depressed. The prince turned to Eldor. He thought the lord hated him. The knight did not know how best to answer, for a little earlier, because of this ignorant child who knows nothing, had struck his dear lady. The man replied that he was only following his lady's will and could not say anything about hating his highness. Even if it was true, he was full of hope that the girl would make the right choice. Van bowed his head and thought his question was pointless, for Eldor strictly obeyed Lady Leopold's will. The groom clenched his fists and promised he would give his best. He believed that Adele had something to gain from him as well, but the lady herself and the truth could only give him freedom and wanted to protect those who protected him and sacrificed for him. The groom warned that Jack would be back soon. The knight left the bedroom wishing him a good rest and thought about the emotion in the fourth prince's gaze on the lady. He knew what that emotion was. The lady had people around her who respected her. Her warm and affectionate temperament attracted others and made her show certain emotions. The lord noted that after the death of the past duke, Adele had changed a lot. So much so that at times she seemed a complete stranger to Eldor. And yet, she continued to sacrifice herself for him, and the knight could only watch her actions. He considered himself useless. A week later, the lady visited the palace library, which was full of rare books. The emperor said he wanted to play the wedding here, so he asked the couple to stay in the castle. It was to be held in 10 days. During this time, Van was to be trained in everything necessary. In the course of such circumstances, the lady was allowed to use the royal library if she got bored. It was felt that His Majesty was willing to make any conditions, as long as the girl did not interfere with the fourth prince's training plan. On one of the shelves, the lady noticed an incredibly old folklore book, which, as expected, had stories about Leopold as well. One of them, the heiress of the family name, decided to read. One chilly winter night, the fiery red dragon Leopold fell in love with a human knight. He became Duke Leopold. After that, in their territories, dragon blood and fiery red hair were passed down from generation to generation. However, the first duke, blinded by greed, carved the red dragon heart, and after that, the huge amount of mana that was stored in the dragon heart is still associated with the Leopold territory. Adele was surprised at what she read, for this story sounded exactly the opposite of what was usually told in her lands. From her memory, the story sounded like this. Long ago, a knight with the gift of gab lost in the forest and met a fiery red dragon. The duke surprised the creature with his eloquence, so the dragon recognized him as his only friend. He received a blessing from the animal. After a time, the dragon, which was left very little, fell into eternal sleep, and the knight became Duke Leopold, and the land on which the dragon fell asleep became the land of Leopold. The girl thought that the story in the book was written by someone who didn't know the inner state of the Leopold family at all. In addition, there was no mention of the lorry in the original story. Furor is created by condensing dragon mana. This was only known to a few people. Adele decided that the story of heart and dragon blood sounded too suspicious. Taking into account the emperor's obsession with the union of the royal family and the Leopold family, and this legend was not a pleasant feeling. As soon as the lady closed the book, the crown prince entered the library. The crown prince welcomed the lady and noted that despite the huge number of books, the duchess kept thinking about her duchy. She admitted that in the run-up to the engagement, she was increasingly visited by thoughts of the empire and her family. Adele, without realizing it herself, found a book and began to read. The prince thought that during her time at the castle, she had already gotten homesick. She confirmed and replied that she was looking forward to the day the ceremony was over. The crown prince was the only person with whom the dubious emperor was close and trusted, and he was also the one who had killed the lady's father. The lad noted that the innocence of the duchess with which she had publicly expressed her feelings, had become an example to many. The girl replied that it was all due to His Majesty's favour. The young man continued to speak. He mentioned the engagement and its importance to the imperial family. The prince thought the groom was suitable for the lady. Adele thanked the crown prince and he was about to leave. But before he did, he warned his bride that the next time they would meet would be at the ceremony. As soon as the guy left, the princess remembered that they had hardly crossed paths in her past life, and it was unknown what he was trying to accomplish with this. She proceeded to spend time in the library alone. That same night, Van had a lesson, sitting on one knee in his father's study, in front of a man who was repeating how and what to do. The groom had no idea that it was only because of His Majesty that he was still in the castle. The teacher moved closer and asked them to memorize those words to repay the kindness in the future. Quite some time had passed, but there was still no way they could finish. I wanted to sleep, eat, drink, and rest. Just at this moment, the guy fell asleep in an important lesson. So the man poured water on the student. He was very displeased. Eldor appeared again. The teachers didn't like it. The man asked to send him away so as not to interfere with the prince's training. After that, they started all over again. Wang managed to forget, in a moment of calm, that this place was truly his. But there was no way he could handle it alone, because he was too weak. The prince knew it from the beginning. The guy shouldn't be looking for pity by pretending to be rude. He needed help. The teacher asked how he was still in such good health if he just ate, slept, and didn't worry about anything. He had to say that it was all thanks to His Majesty the Emperor. The young man repeated this phrase a few more times. One of the assistants entered the study. He told Mr. Garrett that the Emperor was expecting the fourth prince at his office. The butler reminded him that the prince's father was very busy, and he should be grateful for his time. The man thought he was just a kid who couldn't hide his excitement over a dubious position, and if he kept quiet, he would look tolerable because he wasn't good enough. So Lady Leopold's intention to marry a puppet by which she would gain real power is not just a rumour. Wang walked to the door and reminded himself once again that he must not appear too clever or ignorant. He encouraged himself by saying he could do it. When he appeared before the Emperor, he immediately fell to his knees and began praising his father, talking about how happy he was to meet him. The man ordered his son to raise his head, later reminded him that very soon he would be leaving the castle, and inquired about his health, and asked him not to be offended because he paid little attention to his youngest. Van's facial expression was full of fear. The lad's father thought of him as a know-nothing idiot, but that wasn't the case. He asked the prince to talk about Leopold's geographical features and specialization. He had no problem answering. Then the next question awaited him, but this time the groom couldn't answer. He memorized everything he was taught, but had no pride or ego. If Leopold wanted to use this child, the Emperor would do so as well. He asked the fourth prince to show his face. On the table was a vial of medicine that His Majesty had shared. Adele asked Eldor if he had learned anything about it. It turned out that the drug had the effect of increasing the concentration of energy in the body for children and weak men. A suspicion has arisen that the Emperor's plans include pregnancy, but it is prevented from materializing by the groom's erectile dysfunction. Wang blushed with embarrassment. Everyone asked what the prince had heard. He said that from now on, he had to report any actions of Adele Leopold, and it was worth thinking about the continuation of the family as the most important task. The princess thought it was strange that His Majesty had decided to meet with his son for the sake of saying this. It only meant that the Emperor was truly obsessed with the idea of mixing royal blood with Leopold blood. Why didn't anyone just kill Lord Eldor when the girl married him in a past life? The guy decided to add to everything, since they were in the same boat. He warned he couldn't do it. The Duchess smiled and reassured the groom that she wasn't interested in that sort of thing with the lad. But the medicine wasn't supposed to do much harm, so the lady offered to take it and grow faster. The bride gently took hold of Van's face and lifted it a little to get a better look, because she noticed that his skin colour was dulling, even though he had been fed deliciously and put to sleep in a soft bed on time. Something must have been bothering him. The prince thought he was being treated like a child after Adele's words. He remembered the faces of all the people who had recently treated him badly while being trained, but replied that he was fine and nothing was bothering him. Then, the princess asked to tell what they were taught in the lessons, because there were rumours that even Jack was not allowed in. The girl thought it was reckless, The guy explained that it was just etiquette lessons, where they were taught to praise the greatness of the emperor. One of the aides knocked on the door and announced the visit of Prince Ian's servant. Adele went out into the corridor, where a letter was waiting for her. It turns out the third prince had offered to take a walk with him, because it was already flowering season. In the evening, under the setting sun, the couple strolled through the garden. The prince thanked the girl for her time. She thanked in return for the invitation to such a lovely garden. Ian asked how the preparation for the engagement was going and whether the couple was going to return home immediately after the ceremony. The girl said that she was very much helped by friends from the capital, and they would leave for the northern lands, because the Duchess had been here too long and was already homesick. The princess asked why the prince invited the bride. The expression on the third prince's face became a little sad. He said that he had heard about Grainseed's rudeness, so he wanted to ask the question carefully, but he was bursting with curiosity. He asked why she had not chosen him, what the lady wanted that he could not do. Adele pretended not to understand the question and only explained that she had only decided on the engagement because she had fallen in love with the fourth prince. The prince thought that he did not have time to reveal himself completely, but all his words were sincere, so in the depths of his soul, he hoped that the feelings were mutual. But it turned out not so. The guy took a lock of hair in the palm of his hand and admitted that he was very upset. Adele replied that she didn't understand at all what Ian was getting at and asked directly if he liked her. He only said that the girl could be quite callous at times. The lady regretted her behaviour. Even so, he couldn't imagine life without her and wanted to hear an answer. Maybe the lady didn't think he was good enough for her. The princess apologised, praised the guy, and no sooner had she continued than Ian interrupted her. He smiled and considered it a rather trivial refusal, but in her eyes it looked pure truth. In her opinion, the prince loved his family and country more than anything, and there should be a more worthy girl by his side. The lady thought that the bride's refusal would bring him happiness, and asked if she would invite him to her next time as a friend, whether he would accept or not. This question shocked the guy, and he replied that he would look forward to it. The next day, Adele was resting in the corridor when the person in charge of the fourth prince's training, Mr. Garrett, approached her. The girl was happy to meet him because she had wanted to see him for a long time. The bride warned that His Highness would not be able to attend class today, so she sent the man to rest. The teacher apologised and explained that he could not make such decisions on his own because the training was coordinated with the Emperor's order. The bride didn't think it was a problem, since Van had been studying for days on end ever since the engagement was announced and hadn't had a chance to even pick out a suit. The lady felt that His Majesty would not be very pleased with the appearance of the groom in a mat. At the announcement of the union of the Imperial family and the Leopold family, she asked that this be told to the Emperor and that classes be cancelled for the day. Adele warned that if necessary, the couple was willing to stay at the palace for another day to attend the last class. They said their goodbyes and parted ways. Entering the young man's chambers, she found him at his desk, which was all filled with books, and asking if he had ever escaped from his lessons, the lady took the groom and Eldor with her, and they went to the dressing room. Wang was greatly delighted with the large number of beautiful clothes. It was his first trip outside the palace. Still in a carriage, the bride warned that the prince could take his time. He would have the whole day at his disposal. The couple was met by a lady who thought the bride along with her groom were out on a date. Adele got straight to the point and told the lady they needed to try on clothes. The woman called the prince into the fitting room with her. The young man started to feel nervous about having to go there alone. He didn't know at all what he should do in such a situation. It was a bit awkward. After trying on a few costumes, they were able to find a suitable one that suited both the prince and the Duchess. Wang was embarrassed by the beauty of his future wife, his face slightly flushed. The girl was not very comfortable in such clothes, but considering that the groom is younger, wanted everything to look natural. Awkward conversations, walks. But all these occasions were quite funny. After a while, the prince felt terribly energized, for neither Eldor nor Adele looked tired. The princess approached him and offered him a taste of cotton candy. The Duchess thought that the fourth prince was indeed very weak. She made a decision that she would need to start training hard upon returning to the duchy. When the guy felt a little better, the lady offered to eat. The young man cautiously took the food. He must have been a little uncomfortable because he was used to meager food. His face had brightened considerably now. Perhaps there might have been a problem with the prince's training, but it was best not to ask anything at this moment, so as not to unnecessarily alarm him. Instead, as Adele had promised she wanted Van to enjoy his freedom, the princess asked the prince's impressions of the previous day with a smile. The young man smiled back and confirmed that the time spent was pleasant. Then, the girl made the decision that from now on it would be their time. The couple held hands. The bride and groom approached the king. The queen was beside him. The nobles applauded the young ones. The engagement ceremony began. Adele, along with Van, headed to the centre of the hall for their first dance. The prince kept apologising for his mistakes. The girl kept reassuring the young man, because he danced much better than expected. The lady warned that if the guy fell, the lady would try to catch him and move into the final position. The fourth prince didn't like the fact that everyone around them was looking at them. The heroine supported her fiancé, because everything was going much better than one could imagine. The aristocrats were whispering as they watched the pair from afar. From their demeanour, you could tell everything was fine. The princess reminded Van of what she had said earlier as they approached Prince Jan. The groom's brother congratulated the young on their engagement, paid a few compliments on their appearance, and paid no attention to the younger brother. He took the Duchess aside to speak to her. The prince wondered when they had managed to become so close. Irina came up to him to congratulate him. This surprised the young man, as she was the first to speak to him today. The girl asked his permission to talk while the bride was busy. The groom immediately guessed that Adele had sent her friend to him. During this time, he realised that the lady was only doing what she herself wanted. The girl was quite skillful and acted stealthily. Van couldn't guess what she was really up to. Why she was doing it, no one knew. The bride's friend asked why he was acting like that, thinking that the prince was uncomfortable around her. But the guy calmed her down. The Duchess went back to the groom and asked his impressions of the banquet and how he liked his time with Irina. Adele was pleased that the prince was enjoying the evening, and they walked further down the hall when they came across the crown prince. He too congratulated the celebrants and brought his gift. The present was an expensive drink from abroad, and juice from the same lands was brought for the fourth prince. The younger man got a little nervous, and the lady thanked the man, and the pair drank the contents of the glass. Towards the end of the evening, Wang's body started shaking. He couldn't walk and was leaning on the wall. The butler came over to help him. The guy was already sitting on his knees holding onto the wall. Adele was still in the banquet hall. She turned around looking for the groom, but couldn't find him among the crowd. She approached the assistant and asked where the fourth prince was. To this, the man replied that it was hard for the young man to be in crowded places, so he was taken to a quiet place. The princess asked to be shown this room to her as well. Then she was escorted to the door of this bedroom without any problems. Standing in front of it, she was once again convinced that the emperor had not changed a bit and was using the same dirty tricks. The lady found herself in the same room again. Van barely reached the bedroom. He analysed his condition. It was exactly as Adele said. Nausea, dizziness, also chills. It felt like insects were crawling on his body. As soon as the prince crossed the threshold of the room, he immediately fell to the floor. He remembered the words of the men about the dark room where he was locked up. The princess entered the chambers and called out to the young man. She noticed that the fourth prince had not left the window open. The girl hoped he had forgotten. There was no way she wanted to think he had fainted on coming here. The lady called out to the groom again. There was no answer. The guy tried with all his might to crawl to the bed. The lady asked how he felt. On this, the prince only began to apologize and confess his wrong. The girl only smiled softly. Adele went to the groom and hugged him tightly. Van's eyes were full of tears. The Duchess began to calm the young man. After a few minutes, when the prince felt a little better, they opened the window. The lady thanked Eldor for arriving in time with the antidote. He explained that the couple had drunk the poison, which was often used for torture and murder. Its effects were hard for even adults to endure. And because the fourth prince was weak and small, he was even more affected by it. When it entered his body, his mind became cloudy, and he lost control of his body, and it seemed that Wang was even hallucinating. If the Lord had been late, there would have been trouble, but thanks to the night, all was well, and he could go to rest. The man was tormented by the question of how the lady realized that the young man would be escorted to this very room. Adele sat with her head down. She remembered that the emperor had drugged her with this drink back in her first life, and she replied to Eldor that she had just guessed. The lord had sensed something had happened to her. The princess reassured the man and warned him that he really should leave. In her head she was sure that there was nothing to worry about, and the situation from past lives would in no way be repeated. Only deep in the night woke up Prince Wang. The Duchess was lying next to him on the bed in a nightgown, which confused the guy. He jumped up and wondered what the girl was doing in bed. The princess admitted that she couldn't sleep if she felt uncomfortable. The young man's face was flushed and teardrops were still visible. He asked about the effects of the medicine, finding it strange. The lady touched the guy's forehead and inquired what he was feeling now, fever or discomfort. Apparently the symptoms differed according to the body's peculiarities. She suggested a walk. Adele got a rather strange reaction to her question and concern. Van grabbed a pillow and covered himself from the Duchess with it, asking her not to come near him or cross the boundaries of what was allowed. The lady smiled and agreed to the groom's request. Finding his age rather difficult, the girl went to bed, and there was no way the prince could do so. So he continued to sit on the bed. At last everyone settled down. The girl warned that the couple was leaving for the duchy tomorrow. Leopold was calm and at ease, so the prince was free to do what he wanted. It was her gift to him. Van admitted that now he felt much freer than it was before. Even if someone was protecting the guy, he could feel this ease. These revelations pleased the bride. Only one thought was spinning in the mind of the young man, who will protect the Duchess. The next day when Van woke up, Adele was already awake. The guy was surprised that the morning would be so early and asked if the Duchess always woke up at this time. The princess was surprised, for everyone in the palace woke up at about the same interval of the morning. The prince couldn't believe that she was waking up even earlier than the stable boy. The lady smiled and asked for one more request. But no sooner had she finished than there was a knock at the chambers, and the maids entered, saying that they were worried about the girl, for there had been no word from the banqueting hall since her departure. The assistants offered tea, while they were surreptitiously examining the bedroom, especially interested in the linens, on which, at the moment, nothing definite could be said. The lady agreed. The servants noted that the Duchess's appearance was also no different from usual. And yes, the fourth prince was nowhere to be seen. It turned out that the young man was taking a bath. Adele told the women that she wasn't feeling well, so she would like some rest. One of them offered to give mistress a massage, to which she agreed. When the maid came closer to the lady, she noticed the strange marks on her neck and wanted to ask what had happened. In her head, the princess decided that all their actions would be enough for a story. It turned out that behind the screen, Wang did not take a bath, but only pretended to faithfully follow their plan. The servants came out of the bedroom, where a butler was waiting for them, who reported all the information to the emperor. His Majesty was pleased because there was confidence in him that the couple had spent the first night. As the fourth prince was still too young, there were some worries about that, but everything went smoothly. He thought the junior's training had been a success. The man couldn't fail, so the crown prince had to be used. In his mind, the ideal outcome would be to get the Duchess pregnant the first time. However, the emperor was already satisfied that the intimacy happened. Since the engagement was successful, Wang deserved a gift from his father. He ordered the maids from time to time to send his son a medicine to maintain strength. 3 days later, the pair were on their way to the duchy, the lady sitting quietly reading a book, while the prince was very impressionable, for it was his first trip to such a distance. Van asked Jack about it every time he saw something in the carriage window. Everything around him was new to the men. The young man turned to his fiancée and warned her that he was not strange. At this phrase, the lady only smiled softly and considered it a good quality. The prince asked how long they would be on the road. Adele replied that in a couple of hours the train would arrive in Matina, where they would transfer to a carriage and travel to Leopold. As a last resort, they would arrive in the duchy by sunset. The young man was offered a taste of a local sweet that was sold at every stop. Lord Eldor had specially bought it for them at the station. The lad agreed. The Duchess recalled an episode from her childhood, when her father, holding her in his arms, had offered one of the sweets too, with the words that the girl could order them whenever she liked. But it was much more fun to come and taste for herself. After warm memories of Duke Leopold, the girl hurriedly closed the book, then turned around and noticed the crumbs on her fiancé's face and started to clean them up. Van felt a little embarrassed by this. The knight advised using a handkerchief for this. The princess excused herself for thinking a little. The prince's face flushed with embarrassment, and the man warned to eat a little more carefully. Adele got up from her seat and motioned for the company to get out of the carriage. No one expected it to be so soon. Once Van stepped outside, he was surprised because it was a station overlooking the sea. This place was a popular tourist destination, and many trains passed through here, so the young people could take their time and just wait for the next train to Matan. The prince did not understand why the Duchess had made such a decision, for earlier she had said that they were in a great hurry to get home, to which he received the explanation that it was much more fun that way. Van ventured into the water. He enjoyed the view. Behind him stood Adele, who was looking after the young man with care. She compared him to a dog that had never seen snow before. At least for a little while it was possible to remove the mask to be able to breathe. At first glance, everything was as the emperor wanted, so one could relax a little. From that moment on, the best time to become the head of the family was beginning. But there had to be another way, and for the first time in her life, the girl broke her word to her father by choosing this child. The prince called out to the Duchess. She looked at him, and the lad splashed seawater in her face. She wiped herself with a handkerchief. The young man noticed that the lady never enjoyed the beautiful view. He knew there would be few moments like this, so now Van offered to forget his worries for a while, his eyes shining. Adele agreed with his words. The prince smiled. He admitted that everything around him seemed like a dream, but he didn't know what would happen next. But he was sure of one thing. The young man was looking forward to the future. Sometimes the words of the fourth prince surprisingly coincided with the feelings of the Duchess. She confirmed his thoughts with a bright smile on her face. The girl was sure that this time everyone would survive. At sunset, the couple was already quite close to the Duke's castle. The princess reminded Van that he was now Duke Leopold. The guy was shocked by the size of the palace. It was much bigger than he could have imagined. Adele reminded the prince what she had asked him earlier. Her request was that firstly, no one but the Duchess, Eldor and Jack, no one should know his true identity. Secondly, Wang was free to walk around the residence, but in no way could he go down into the dungeon. The Lord wondered if the castle residents would be surprised by such innovations. No one in the lady's family had been informed of the engagement to the fourth prince, but the news had spread all over the country, so surely they already knew about everything. She recalled a moment from her first life. Then, the princess had told no one about marrying Grania. Then they had expected it to some extent. And now they must be surprised at the unexpected engagement to a prince everyone thinks is crazy. Maybe some would be upset, but on the other hand, there was still regret that because of her carelessness, she was worried that many might treat the fourth prince coldly. Finally, the carriage arrived at the palace. All the servants and residents of the castle were already standing at the exit to greet the Duchess. The first to arrive was Hans, the butler of the Leopold estate. All present bowed and congratulated the young ones on their engagement. The prince awkwardly thanked for the warm words. Next, Sarah, the head maid, introduced herself. She approached the boy and offered to come with her to escort him to his chambers, at which time Adele asked Hans for his reaction to the choice of groom. The man replied that everyone was very surprised, but thought there must be a good reason for it. So he hoped Wang would turn out to be a better person than the second prince. The princess laughed and thought that the butler would scold her if she chose to marry him. But that wasn't true, for she was the one who got to choose. For the whole duchy, it was the most important thing, and everyone was glad that the lady had returned in good health. Already in the evening, the couple was dining with the rest of the inhabitants. Those around her tried to take care of her, but she refused. The girl admitted that she was worried about being in the capital for so long. She turned to Van. The Duchess smiled and took the groom's cheek with the words that it was time for the children to go to bed. He was embarrassed. She rose from the table with him and wished the others a good evening. Hans took the young man away. Eldor walked down the corridor with his mistress and asked about her well-being, for she had had too much to drink. The girl was only glad to be home at last. The lord noticed that on his return, the lady looked as lively as ever. The lady confessed that she would like another drink, but it was no fun to be alone, so she offered the knight to drink with her in her room. They entered the princess' bedroom and took a glass each with a drink. Adele was surprised because she didn't expect such a reaction. Before she was concerned. However, it was all over. The lady entered Van's chambers and asked him about his impressions of Leopold. He admitted to being very full from the evening. All attempts to take care of the lad were very nice. Everyone warmly welcomed the new duke because they believed in their lady. The bride, however, believed in Leopold, her father, and Lord Eldor. She knew everyone was worried about that. As the head of the family, the girl was worried about every step she took, as she could not get proper education. If not for the memory of her father, there would not have been such hospitality as there is today. The lady really wanted to lead the Leopold family to protect these people, the land, and herself. So she asked the knight to believe in her, just as the man believed in her father. Adele thought everyone was talking about continuing to trust because they had faith in the Leopold family and its previous head. But that wasn't the case at all. Eldor explained that trust was not inherited. It always had to be earned. Those around him remembered how it had been a few years ago, when a squad led by the Duke had gone missing. The young lady, who seemed likely to faint on receiving the news of her father's disappearance, was able to control herself and tried to help the soldiers and the Duke in any way she could. The knight confessed that he could never forget that girl who, desperately holding back tears, inspired those around her, and even before her father's grave, thought of him first and foremost. Her faith in Mistress had been sown by herself, even in the worst of times. Adele looked back. She thought she had been too stupid, naive, incompetent, and narrow-minded at that time of her life. Eldor noted that after the Duke's death, she had changed a lot. She didn't smile or show her tears as before. It was her strong decision to protect Leopold. The Lord admitted that whatever the lady's choice, he would always support her and was sure the others thought the same. The lady clutched her dress in her fist and tried to hold back her tears, but she failed. The princess thanked the knight. The man rose from the table and spoke. "I, Eldor Shanktis, will raise my sword for you and give my life for you. I will protect you no matter what it costs me." Adele had one request. She wanted the Lord to become the prince's teacher. The next day, Van along with Jack walked around the castle grounds. The man was looking into a book and talking about the places they had passed. The prince asked what it was he was holding in his hands. The stableman told him it was a story of Leopold that had been given to him by the other servants of the residence. The prince had been in the castle for a week, but never had time to see everything. He thought that the girl was very busy because the palace was very large, but still, a week away from the capital was considered a long time for a guy. In the middle of the garden, the friends were met by Hans, who told them that my lady had a surprise for him. The butler escorted the young man to the study, where Lord Eldor was waiting for him. The man announced that he would be training him. On the same day, there was a meeting to protect the Leopold family's vast wealth. Besides, it was important to be at the forefront of the monster hunting group. No one in any way did not condemn the lady's choice. However, the trouble was that no great victories would be expected from the fourth prince, who would become the new head of House Leopold in the future, for the head of the family had many responsibilities. These included ensuring the prosperity and security of the lands owned, keeping peace throughout the north. It was the Axis that kept the balance. Some began to suggest finding someone to help guard the territories, and a good solution would be to appoint a commander of the Knights of the Duchy as soon as possible. Someone said that no expeditions could be conducted without funds, even if there was money. As long as the area was unsafe, no people could be allowed in. In addition, there was already a trade route of spreading the resources of the duchy, but there was no point in it now, since there was no one to gather those resources. Adele agreed with the last words, but did not consider this fact a hindrance. The girl was not going to interrupt the history of prosperity of the duchy. She promised to find and provide a way to keep the balance, and not stop developing. The butler had been furtively eavesdropping under the study doors, and warned that the atmosphere was hot. He felt that the lady would be very tired after the meeting, so his duties tonight would include special attention to dinner. When the meeting was over, the lady returned to her chambers, where Hans was already waiting for her with a cup of tea. The man praised the princess for her excellent appearance and the fine results of the negotiations. Adele thought she had acquired all the skills thanks to her father. It had been a long time since they had held a meeting, so it was expected to take a long time. plus the atmosphere was tense due to recent events. It had cost great labor to resolve all the contradictions, and the lady was very tired. So Hans suggested that she rest until it was time for dinner, to which the Duchess readily agreed. Adele wondered where His Highness was at this time. It turned out that right now he was already finishing his first lesson, which had been quite successful. The princess had visited the study room and was watching him with parental concern from a little further away. Van noticed her and reminded himself that it had been a week since they had seen each other. He greeted the bride and assumed that the Duchess was very busy. This proved to be true, for she had to be away for a long time because of the protracted journey. She warned that the prince also had much to do. The lady felt that the process of learning the basics was too slow, but that was a consequence of the fact that he had received no education in the royal palace and had to catch up now. The lady decided that the young man was too small and weak for his age, but the lord reassured her that his height had nothing to do with strength and stamina. Wang frustratedly replied that it was useless for him to study, because he still has to make a fool of himself. The bride replied that this was not true. In her opinion, learning is not only about accumulating knowledge, but also about learning about the lives of people who have had this experience before. Challenges, successes, failures, culture, and history. Through everything, the young man could indirectly learn about the world in various fields. The more he learned, read, and realized, the more he would be able to acquire, and it would all come in handy, no matter what kind of life His Highness would lead. These phrases inspired the guy to keep learning. He admitted to himself that he was actually interested. The girl thought it was cute when the groom awkwardly tried to express his feelings. Adele promised that if Van studied hard, she would grant his wishes, things he wanted to get or places he wanted to visit, and anything else that was within the lady's power. Eldor brought a packed box and presented it to the prince as a gift for completing today's test. Everyone was surprised. The princess asked if the knight had bought this, especially for the guy. The lord thought the learning process should be interesting. And yes, His Highness had worked very hard today. Van smiled and admitted that this was his first award and decided to open it with Jack. The princess smiled and replied that the stable boy would definitely like it, and now the young man was behaving appropriately for his age, as long as he was extremely cautious and kept his blade at the ready, then tried to hide his feelings. Eldor said the young man could call him as usual. The prince thanked him. The lady noticed that Van was feeling much better now. Heinz entered the study with the news that a guest from the Imperial Palace had arrived. It turned out to be Garrett. He began to read a letter from His Majesty. It said that sending the loyal Duchess Leopold uneducated prince is a disgrace to the Empire, so the father sent a teacher from the palace for his son to fill in the missing knowledge and teach the rules of etiquette. Also, a gift was given for Lady Leopold herself. The lady accepted the Emperor's gift, and the man warned that henceforth he would assist Wanu and promised to make every effort to make him a worthy husband. Adele appreciated the Emperor's cunning move and thought that he just wanted to continue to follow her. It remained to wait and see how he would proceed. In the evening, the prince sat in the study with his head bowed, and Heinz apologized to Jack. The stable boy replied that someone like him couldn't be His Highness's servant. The butler reassured him by saying that no one thought so. His Highness, the lady and everyone else was upset. The man was determined to do everything in his power to keep him here. He was glad of it, and wanted to stay at least as a stable boy in the duchy. The prince covered his face with his hands and pondered whether to tell Adele that he didn't like Mr. Garrett. But most likely, she wouldn't be able to do anything either, because the Emperor had sent him. The teacher called out to the guy, which startled him a little. After a second, the man raised his hand. Wang squirmed, preparing to get hit, but he only squatted down next to him and asked how he was doing. The next morning, some servants were peeking from around the corner behind Van. They noticed Lord Garrett next to him. They all knew he was a bad man and wouldn't let them play with His Highness. The maid reminded the spies that the prince was not their age, but the guy never minded spending time with them, and with the arrival of the teacher, everything would change. Rumour had it that he had even offended the cook in the kitchen. The aide chased all the extras away from the doors and went to do her business. Lord Garrett closed the doors and asked the young man what he had learned in today's lesson. Wang replied, a little apprehensively, that on His Majesty's orders, a magical railroad had been laid across the empire, and this was the basis for it. But before he could finish, His teacher sat him down and praised him for his improved memory. The man held the young man by the shoulders and reassured him that no one would laugh at him here, and that he should relax, and that good people lived here. But he shouldn't take it at face value, because no one needed him. According to the Lord, the inhabitants of the castle pretended to be kind as they cared for the young lady, and they didn't care about the groom at all. Wang began to think that he was still useless. Garrett asked what was required of His Highness. The prince replied that he had to do what the emperor said. The teacher praised the lad, and reminded him that he was the man His Majesty had sent. This meant that his words expressed the emperor's will. It was already nightfall. It had been 10 days since the Lord had arrived. He had not moved a step away from the prince, leaving him only during lessons with Eldor, yet he had done nothing. Adele entered Van's bedroom where he was sound asleep. The princess remembered that when the groom first arrived he was shy and noisy, but today he must be very tired. The girl sat down next to him and noticed that he was having nightmares again. He was constantly being followed, and it only made the young man feel worse. It was true that they were together for mutual benefit, but she was worried that the guy was suffering because of her. The lady apologized to the groom and promised that she would certainly make him free, after which she lay in bed beside him. The young man woke up and screamed in fright. Van wondered why she didn't wake up, but after a couple of seconds the lady opened her eyes. The guy asked if the lady was tired. He was surprised that he had worked late and slept for so long, but he still woke up before his bride. The prince offered to sleep some more, but she silently hugged him and kept repeating, "Everything will be all right," before wishing him good night's sleep and going back to bed. The young man wondered why she did so, for he had said nothing during this time. He wondered how the lady noticed and cared for everything. In the morning, Van was already in his office practicing his writing. Behind him, Adele was watching with a smile. He wondered why she hadn't come to the first class, but now she was so interested. Apart from Jack and the lady no one cared about the prince, he deliberately pretended to be a fool so as not to attract attention. From the moment they first met, the princess had been special to him. Eldor walked over to his student and thanked him for his efforts before announcing that time was up. The boy hadn't finished his assignment yet and asked him to sit for a bit longer. The Lord replied that completing a task in a certain time frame was also a kind of challenge. He took the task sheets from the young man and began to look at the work. The knight addressed the lady, saying that the prince has an exceptional talent for math. After that, the lady asked Van how he feels about this science. The guy replied that he likes it. Adele asked Eldor to take care of the prince. For today the lessons were over, and the princess wanted to go for a walk. For this she prepared a camouflage suit. The prince asked if she was sure, because in any case Garrett would go with them. The Duchess said not to worry about him, for he would not wake up until tomorrow morning. This phrase frightened the lad. The lady only warned him not to take the habit of drinking a lot in the future. The disguise was enough for the young man, but the bright red hair of the lady could be recognized by absolutely everyone. Then Eldor suggested one option. Finally, the couple made it out into the city. The scenery was different from the capital. There were many volcanoes around the city. The princess was glad that the groom liked it, and he could not get used to the new hair color. The young men drank a special potion that could change the color of their hair. Their heart was beating strangely. It was probably because of the new sensations. The lady talked about how the ancestors didn't like tall buildings and believed that volcanoes had protective powers. Though the northern lands were not as bright and colourful as the streets of the capital, but the people seemed very happy with their lovely home. Eldor walked behind the couple and smiled. He called out to Van and noted that he looked much happier when he wasn't worrying about what those around him thought of him. The disguise worked well, so the young man didn't need to pretend. The prince thought about the fact that the mask of the idiot was no longer protecting him. Henceforth it had become his cage. Adele brought the groom out of his thoughts and offered to buy a keepsake. He could choose anything if he liked something during the walk. The guy thought a little and asked the lady to buy him flowers. The lady didn't expect such a decision at all and wondered if he had liked them for a long time. The Duchess clarified if he wanted a particular flower or a particular colour and pointed to blue plants, but he didn't like them and asked to buy a white chrysanthemum. This choice frightened the lady, for she knew that these plants were used to weave wreaths for funerals. The prince also knew this and said that if he had the money, he would have bought it himself. But now, he did not have the opportunity to buy himself, so he asked his bride to pay for his gift, and the choice fell exactly on the chrysanthemum, because the young man wanted to honor the memory of the lady's father. Adele smiled, her face flushed, which surprised her fiancé. He thought the princess wasn't feeling well, but she just didn't expect it to be about her father. The Duchess thanked Van for remembering her, but the guy didn't see it as anything special, and there was nothing to thank him for. The girl explained that among the members of the Imperial family, he was the only one who was so merciful. Eldor smiled again and praised his apprentice for having a good heart because it was considered a valuable quality. The lady once again thanked her fiancé sincerely for thinking of Duke Leopold. The prince blushed at so many good words in his direction, and the lady drew closer to him and whispered that his act was adorable. The heroine, bidding her companions, hastened to make time to stop by her father's house. The next day, Wang came to Lord Garrett's class. The first thing he did was to make him drink a medicine to improve his health. After all, he is the heir of the emperor. The young man smiled and agreed with the teacher's words. In fact, the guy knew what the drink was and thought about the fact that if it was that valuable, the man drank it himself. At the same time, the instructor walked up to the young man and took him by the ear. He began to demand that the student say what he had learned. The prince bowed his head in silence. Then Gareth grabbed him by the collar of his shirt and once again ordered him to answer. The lord thought Lady Leopold was foolish enough to choose him and asked if the couple was having a good time together. He threw the lad to the floor and said that because of his merit, His Majesty would easily take the duchy. The prince lay on the floor and remembered the bride's desirable red hair. The teacher stood over him and kept asking. The next question was about their night together. Even though there were rumours, the failure was still expected. If the young man had done the right thing, she wouldn't continue to call herself the temporary head of the family. If Gareth had been in his fiancé's shoes, he would have made her obey. The man received a punch to the jaw. Wang demanded him to apologise for insulting Adele. His voice trembled a little. The lord couldn't bear to be treated like this, and grabbed the prince by the throat with words that he was indeed hopeless. The teacher gave a chance to save his life, but if the guy continued to behave like this, he would refuse to teach the groom. The young man delivered another blow to his jaw. This time, he took a candlestick from the table. Garrett deemed the student's behaviour unacceptable, but the young man did not listen to him and continued to demand an apology. The man stood leaning against the door. It suddenly opened, and he fell to the floor. A strange picture appeared before the assistants. Lying on the floor of the lord, and opposite him stood Wang, with a candlestick in his hands. The teacher was not confused, and began to play a play in which he made His Highness look like an evil person. The prince's face expressed complete bewilderment, and after a while, the story was reported to the Duchess, who could not believe that the groom had grabbed the candlestick and swung it like a sword. The narrator wondered if an envoy from the Imperial family could be trusted, but all the household spoke well of the prince, and said there was no way he could have done such a thing. And if this was just the beginning, that if such a thing were to happen again when His Highness became Duke, Lady Leopold would call for the engagement to be called off. Adele thought to those who did not know the truth, there was no point in proving anything. Wang sat in the garden under the setting sun. He didn't want to disappoint anyone with today's incident, neither the Duchess nor the others. When the groom saw the princess today, he began to doubt whether she could fulfill the duties of the head of the family. After all, to bring into the house of the fourth prince, as his fiancé, without consulting anyone could strike a blow to the reputation of the duchy. In all the troubles of the bride, he began to blame himself. The lady, like no one else, loves Leopold, and the incompetence of the young man hurt her. He could not help his bride in any way. Tears came to his eyes, and he decided to go to the stables so that no one would see him. He was walking through the garden, in a place where no one was walking, but he heard strange sounds like someone fighting with swords. Not far away, he noticed a lady who was fencing with Eldor. Van sat down by the wall and was extremely surprised. Even if he didn't know what kind of sword it was, he could tell that Adele wielded it amazingly and fights much better than the prince. This hurt him, and he hurriedly left that place. The next day, the Duchess was sitting in her study, busying herself with papers, when Heinz brought her a letter bearing the seal of the Union State. The lady opened it and began to read. The news that was written in it eased the princess's soul. It was unlikely, but the fear that something would go wrong was present. There were matters that needed to be dealt with immediately. Needing to get rid of Garrett to make further plans to prevent the Emperor's interference, in this case, she was worried about Van's condition in her absence, how they would react when they found out. Eldor and the prince had a lesson in the other office. A lady was passing by and decided to stop by. She noticed that Leopold's resources were the topic of study today. She told the young man a little about the main resource. Pura, 60% of the quarried stone shipped to the continent was from this duchy. The boy was impressed by the description of the crystal and wondered what it looked like in real life, because in the book it looked like a pearl. Adele suggested that today's class be held outside. The couple was walking through the forest. When they were almost there, the young man was tired. He could not keep on his feet and began to fall. As here, he was picked up by the princess and offered to carry him. Van was embarrassed and justified that he was just not used to climbing mountains. The Duchess laughed at him, and they went on. After a while, the climb was over. All they needed now was an artifact with ice magic. It gave off a pleasant chill. The young ones were warmly dressed. The young man thought it unnecessary and asked the real reason, to which the lady explained that he would find out a little later. The bride and groom descended into the ravine where it was unbearably hot. It was palpable even with the artifact, the guy called out to the Duchess, to which she again offered to carry him. Wang said he only wanted to ask how she felt in such heat. She admitted that thanks to the blessing of the Red Dragon, the descendants of their family easily endured such weather. The prince was surprised at this fact and asked if the lady's tall stature could not be a peculiarity of the Leopold family. The lady hesitated and suggested that this was a correct statement. The princess asked the young man not to worry about it, for if he eats well and studies hard, he too is sure to grow up, just as, at the end of this dialogue, they came to the place where the Pura is mined. The further inland they went, the larger specimens they were able to see. The young man was extremely surprised at what he saw and thought about them coming here because of him. He became worried that he was distracting his fiancée. Van asked if this heat was coming from the stone, but it wasn't. It turned out that the other deposits weren't so hot. The reason for this was the active volcano they were inside. It could start erupting any second. The prince was surprised because he figured that was the fact that gave birth to the legend of the sleeping dragon. Adele had never seen it, but knew it definitely existed. The fact that the Pura in this mine had an extremely high mana content, thanks to the dragon, the lady warned the groom that he shouldn't appear here alone, or he might get lost. The girl found a couple of stones and handed them to the young man as a gift. She thought the guy liked the stone. In fact, she wanted to give him the biggest and most beautiful stone they were going for. Tears appeared in the prince's eyes. He apologized for the trouble he had caused in the last few days. He had gotten so much out of the Duchess, but had only been in the way, and perhaps the princess had business to attend to today that she had cancelled for the sake of the hike. Adele dismissed all bad thoughts and admitted that she came here because she wanted to choose a gift and present it to him personally. She felt guilty because he had left the palace because of her and had to suffer. The lady suggested not to regret anything. The prince agreed with her. After that, the princess asked him to wait for 3 years. By then, everything would have to be over. After this period of time, His Highness will remove his mask. Whether he becomes her husband or not, the prince will be completely free. After the walk, Van was resting in his bedroom. He was holding a Pura. And remembering Adele's words that it would be over in 3 years, he decided he should be happy hearing that. Instead, the prince felt abandoned. What the Duchess said was true. He thought he wanted to be free, but never imagined how he would live. If he had to leave this place in 3 years, what would happen next? Besides this question, there was something more important. The young man approached one of the shelves where there was a large number of vials with medicine and decided that it was time to put the plan into action. Lady Leopold was in the library of the residence. A large stack of books stood beside her. She thought she had no useful information. In her first life, she had been disposed of just after the birth of her child. The causes of death in the second and third lives remained a mystery. The royal family was once again waiting for the birth of an heir. It wasn't just the cause of death. Before making vague conjectures, the best solution was to approach it wisely. Why the emperor needed a child, Leopold blood, legends, blessings, and an heir all mattered. The lady thought of the cellar where a blood relative of the Leopold family could enter, but only the head of the family could open the secret door, a hunch that His Majesty knew what lay behind the door. The girl started to remember what she did in her past life. She was doing research. After a second, the lady jumped up because she forgot one thing. In her past life, she wanted to know the Emperor's intentions. Adele had tried again and again to figure it out, however. What exactly she did, and what she was able to find, the lady couldn't remember. Why it hadn't seemed strange to her until now, whether her memory was failing the heroine, she began to ponder the question, but the likely answer was no. So, the lady decided to go down to that very basement with the key to the secret door. When she stepped out into the hallway and headed for it, she was met by Heinz. The butler was looking for her, for she was not in the study. Lady Leopold replied that everything was all right, but at the same moment, clutching her head, the man became anxious about her and offered his help. Just then, a rumbling sound was heard behind. They turned around and saw Prince Purdes lying on the floor. The girl screamed in fear and rushed to her fiancé and lifted him up. Tears came to her eyes. The lady looked around the area, around the young man, and exhaled. There was no blood near him, but on the second floor of the residence, one of the butlers had ploughed Garrett to the floor. The man was trying to elicit what he was trying to do. The Lord justified that he only pushed the guy away because he was scared, because usually the young man sat quietly, but now he made a noise. The teacher thought that the groom was deliberately trying to get him into trouble. Adele watched what was happening from above and ordered them to stop talking because she had heard enough already, and ordered the knights to grab and lock the man up. Even at this moment, Garrett was trying to justify himself, while the others were worried about the prince's condition, because he had fallen down the stairs. Maybe it was due to recent excitement, or maybe there was some other reason. The Duchess told Heinz to keep an eye on the Lord to make sure he didn't escape. The broken vials and invited spectators were a failure of the teacher. It was a reckless but intelligently planned move. Wang's face looked serene and calm. He probably didn't expect to fall down the stairs. There was magic in the air. It just so happened that the fourth prince possessed magic. If it wasn't for the threat to his life, the powers wouldn't have manifested, and he would have just died. The boys tore up the piece of paper with the flower drawn on it, and called it a common joke, over which it was not worth making a fuss, of course, being despised for being born a servant girl. Zernos laughed, and noted that Purdes looked good on the floor. The bullying from that guy who thought he was better than the fourth prince had given him an inferiority complex. After everyone began to consider him a fool, the child simply ceased to exist. The constant ridicule became something natural. But now the young man hated this ordinariness. A man who can't be relied on, and a man who only relies on one. Wang didn't want to be like this anymore. This was his truth. After this revelation, the guy woke up. He immediately sat down on the bed. Adele was beside him, forbidding him to do so, and asked how he was feeling. The young man wondered what had become of Garrett. From the lady, the groom learned that the teacher was now behind bars, and the lady herself was anxious to know what had happened at that moment. Wang confessing that he wanted to get rid of the Lord, make him angry by insisting that the prince refused to take the medicine and broke all the vials he had. But the man was much angrier than the young man expected. He couldn't even think of falling. Wang said that it was difficult to get rid of the emperor's envoy, but since he openly threatened the Imperial family member and hit him. But before he could finish the sentence, Adele interrupted him. The lady felt that she should have done it herself, and the young man had acted too recklessly, using himself as bait, and that it had all worked out was a huge stroke of luck. She couldn't believe the guy had decided to do this and not say a word to the lady, because if something went wrong, he could have died. The prince was a little scared by her words. The groom admitted that he was doing it for the people of the duchy. After all, the princess was also worried about the castle. And here, they had an excuse to kick Garrett out. The girl let these words pass her ears. Why he was worried about her was the only question she cared about now. After all, sooner or later, Adele would sort everything out. If Van was sitting still, he should have been thinking about himself. The prince didn't understand what the bride meant, to which he received a reminder of wanting to be free. Indeed, the hero wanted that for both himself and the princess, so he wanted to try to do something about it. After these words, the Duchess rose and turned away from the injured man. Tears appeared in her eyes. Before leaving, she asked him not to get up unnecessarily because the doctor said to rest for a few days. Jack spotted her in the hallway. The stable boy entered the chambers with a smile on his face. But noticing the sad expression on his friend's face, he immediately became concerned about his condition. The young man knew Adele was angry because of the excitement. He was sorry for making her worry. The man asked why on earth the guy had broken all those bubbles. Van covered himself with a blanket and admitted that they made him angry, and he was angry with himself. The Duchess went down to the dungeon where Garrett was sent. Even though he was in his position, he continued to justify himself and make himself look good. But the lady was impenetrable. She had the testimony of 6 witnesses who had seen with their own eyes how the man had pushed the prince. The teacher had been drinking a lot lately, and apparently he was having memory problems. The messenger reminded him that he had been sent here by the emperor himself. He was his right-hand man, and it didn't matter who the lady was. In his opinion, she had no right to treat him like that. The princess accused Garrett of embezzling funds issued for the maintenance of the 4th prince, the theft of Duchess Leopold's property received in honour of the betrothal. Most importantly, an attempt on the life of a member of the Imperial family. Adele was determined to personally request a trial of the culprit from His Majesty the Emperor. Garrett Arons betrayed his duty, aided and abetted the prince for personal gain, embezzled funds from the royal treasury, and harmed the imperial family. All these unlawful acts jeopardized the authority of the imperial family. Duchess Leopold humbly requested His Majesty to pass sentence on him. Adele admitted that she completely trusted and believed the man. After all, he was sent by the emperor and provided him with everything he needed. But she couldn't imagine in any way that he was capable of crimes. Upon discovering the misappropriation of funds, investigations were repeatedly conducted, but only circumstantial evidence was found in the envelope. Gareth went so far as to injure the prince. At these words, the culprit shouted excuses in his own direction, but His Majesty ordered him to be silent, and the lady continued. His Highness was fortunate to avoid serious injury, but if he would still be hurt, after this sentence the lady cried. The emperor understood the bride's feelings. He was saddened by the last incident. The girl thanked for the understanding and support. Considering it a generosity on the part of the father of the groom, she asked only to give this criminal his due punishment. The man agreed and ordered Garrett to be taken away. He was frightened and began to shout to remind his master that he had promised to protect him, but the emperor was too angry. The criminal was to be executed tomorrow at dawn. At this moment, the 4th prince had won an unqualified victory. Adele stood with her head bowed and realized that it couldn't end like this. The Duchess confessed to His Majesty that thanks to the incident, she had realized that for the sake of protecting His Highness, she must change, a decision she had made on her own. As the head of the Leopold family, an imperial sword, the lady no longer wanted to suffer losses due to her weakness and asked for permission to join the Allied Academy to gain more knowledge of the world. The Emperor interrogated if she really wanted to study in the Allied Academy and not the Imperial Academy, the lady confirmed, because if she entered the Imperial Academy, there would be people who would be displeased. However, having joined the Union Academy, she would not be able to leave her post for a long period and requested permission to leave for a short 2-year period, although the training lasted for 5 years. The girl didn't think that a person who led a family and protected His Highness should go through a full period of training, and if given the opportunity, she would broaden her horizons in just 2 years, after which could serve the imperial family better than before. The emperor was still tormented by doubts about the time limit set by the princess. In front of the ruler, the butler sat on his knees with an open box full of high-grade fury, used only in emergencies, even in the capital of the empire. As a token of gratitude, it was decided to present it from the Leopold family annually. For every solemn occasion, the emperor's eyes filled with greed, after which he agreed to all the terms. At night, the lady returned to the residence. Heinz met her and wanted to offer her rest, but she waved it off, saying she had some other business to attend to. She had to find someone to keep an eye on the emperor during the Duchess's absence. Irina, who knew about every movement of the nobles, came to her mind. But to follow His Majesty, Viscountess Martine, responsible for politics, who left her son in the capital, would be better suited. Further important step will be to show what relations the lady had with the prince and firmly establish her position. The butler and mistress were strolling down the corridor When Adele inquired about His Highness's condition, the doctors said he would be able to get back on his feet by tomorrow. In the near future, the princess's plans included a banquet. Heinz said he would take care of it. The lady was counting on her assistant, for they needed to show everyone that in the north, the power belonged to the Leopold family. The girl carefully entered Van's chambers where he was already asleep. She stroked his head and thought that he was using himself as a pawn in this game, defending the Duchess, claiming it was his wish. She smiled softly at him, for she was trying to suppress the guilt in her. But the child continued to evoke the emotions she wanted to avoid. All sorts of memories associated with him rolled through her mind. Adele began to ponder aloud what she should have done with the prince. The young man woke up early in the morning and was finally able to get out of bed. 3 days of lying in bed was hard for him. He turned his head towards the bedside table, where there was a note. "Don't make mistakes, Purdy's." The text on the paper read. It surprised the boy.